with Rachel McDonald. So this is going to be a special spooky themed list. And that's because recently we celebrated 2 years doing this stuff together. Now, for regulars, you might remember last year, to mark the 1 year anniversary, we did our best horror movies of all time, individual lists, of course. So we thought it made sense to do the flip of that, and that is, in our opinion, the worst of horror from our point of view. So a top 20 each, or bottom 20 might be a fitting way. I want you guys to maybe have a think about what your worst horrors are. If you want to hit us with a top 20, then go ahead, or just list some of your least favorite horror movies, and we'll hopefully get a bit of a conversation going over it. But before we start, Rachel, I just want to ask, really, what do you consider a bad thing in a horror movie? Like, what if it appears in a horror movie, or if a horror movie has it, is something which sort of makes it a bad horror movie?
So for me, I think it's more of a general, like, not a specific thing. Like, I can deal with a lot in horror, and horror is one of those genres where I don't always worry too much about, say, the story or the characters, because you're more there for the scares. So for me, and we've talked about this before, the worst thing a horror movie can be is boring. And for me, those are really the worst ones, are the ones that are just really dull, that are not made well, that don't actually scare you, and that don't really have much originality. I like a little bit of originality in horror films. You know, I like to see something where the director might be having a bit of fun with the direction, or the actors, or the scares. So for me, yeah, if you've got, say, if it's boring, if it's too over the top. I think sometimes horror tries to, like, for example, I do have a couple of horror comedies on here which just do not work because they just went too far. But I think for me, the biggest flaw is if it is boring, and if I cannot see how it could be scary, even if it doesn't scare me, because obviously when you watch a lot of horror, you do unfortunately start to get desensitized. But I think it's very easy to still watch a horror film and be like, oh, that's a scary moment. And you can tell that it is a scary moment. Even if you aren't scared, you know that it would be effective for your average viewer. So a movie that doesn't really do that, a movie that maybe relies too much on, like, old tropes, like jump scares, and like bad reveals, things like that. But for me, I really do think the biggest insult is when you have a boring horror film and you watch there and your adrenaline doesn't go up at all. You're just kind of like blah. So I do think that is. And I also do think remakes are getting a little bit out of control. I mean, we saw that in the early to mid 2000s. And I feel like if you're going to do a remake, you need to do something new, interesting, or different. And I feel like a lot of remakes don't. So you'll see that evidenced a little bit on my list as well. What about you? What makes a bad horror film for you?
Okay, well, I don't really need to say much because I think you've covered what I was going to say. Like, boring is definitely at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. And that probably applies to movies in general, but because of the nature of horror, because it's the sort of genre where we can enjoy a so bad it's good type movie, or it can be a bit of fun, and I think most horrors should be a little bit of fun at some point, even if they are deadly serious and hard-hitting horrors. And I think as a genre, it just should be entertaining. Like, I think that is part of its sort of DNA. Like, it's almost like you're going on a Friday night, you want to unwind, you want to just sort of a fun time a lot of time. You want it to be tense, obviously, as well, but you do want a fun time, sort of thrills and spills. So, yeah, I mean, in general, the boring rule applies to films in general, but, like, I think especially for horrors in many ways. And yeah, it's something you touched on is, I think, really cheap jump scares I don't like, and I think they have been overused in cinema and in horror movies. And probably the characters, I would point out, because although they're not always the most important thing, especially but with certain horrors, like certain like slasher movies and things like that, you are spending a lot of the movie with these characters. So
true.
I think if they're too grating, then that does tend to drag the movie down quite a lot for me. Either have to be like entertaining bad characters to sort of save it, or they have to be interesting and people I want to root for. So Rachel, you can kick us off with your number 20.
All right. So because it's the worst, we're obviously, I'm assuming, going from least worst to absolute worst. So starting with the milder ones and getting into things ones. So when I do this list, there's probably going to be people who are going to be like, these movies are not that bad. But I've realized that I either haven't watched a lot of really bad horror, or I have a very high tolerance for bad horror and just don't seem to count a lot of movies that some people would think about as bad. So there are some on here that you might go, but like I said, I did struggle a bit with this list. But I'll kick it off. So at number 20 is a film that we have reviewed. Very, very mild. And I really just got it on here because it's part of a franchise. And I feel like it's the worst entry in the franchise because it was the most boring. And that is Final Destination 4, which I really did not like when we did our review. So the other Final Destinations, anyone who's been watching this channel knows I love the first one and I really adore the second one. The third one is at least schlocky fun, and we liked the fifth one because it had that tie-in to the first one that was like a great little reveal. The fourth one, however, I remember finding boring. The kills were not as good. The opening scene, we talked about this in our review, but it's where it defies all laws of physics and gravity and God knows what is happening on that racetrack. It's just the worst. For me, it was the worst of all of the disasters. And I remember not liking any of the characters. And as you said, you want to at least be able to root for the characters, if nothing else. You want to be able to like them. And I just didn't. And I think we talked about this in our review. The direction for this one was really weird. There were some really like very 2000s moments that we found. They did that weird bit at the end where they suddenly changed to like animation, like right in the end scene. And it was just a really odd, disjointed movie. And like I said, because it is part of a franchise that I do quite like, and where I do really love the first two movies, I found this one just kind of dragged the franchise down overall and was definitely my least favorite. So that's my number 20, Final Destination 4, starting off the very mild end.
Okay, that's fair. So 4's the one that has that stuff in the cinema at the end, isn't it? Which
yes, that
which
really
we thought
weird.
was really dumb. Yeah.
Yes, that's the thing with it. It was dumb. And I know the Final Destination films aren't exactly the most highbrow cinema, but the first two at least are still fun and they're still smart in certain ways. But the fourth one was just, it was really stupid and just did not enjoy it.
Is the fourth one the one with the gymnast scene? Because that at least is, that might be 5.
I think that was from the fifth one. Yes, because I thought that because we quite liked really that death scene. Because it was so like, woo, intense. But no, I'm pretty sure that one was from 5. I actually don't really remember a lot of the deaths in 4. And see, that's such a little impact that it had on me. When you don't remember the death scenes in a Final Destination film, you're definitely doing something wrong. So
so someone let us know in the comments, because I had a feeling that might have been from 4, but like if it was from 4, then I think that's a standalone really good scene, and the rest is I would have to have a think, because I've only seen 4 the once, but probably thinking about it possibly is the weakest of those movies. So okay, fair enough. So my number 20, it's a Kevin Smith film, and you can probably guess, because he's only really done one horror. Well, technically 2, because he did a follow-on, which I've not seen. So it is the first one, Tusk.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one, but I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, first of all, I'm not a big Kevin Smith fan, bar his early films. Some of his early films I quite enjoy, but as he's gone on, I've not seen all of his films, but he is very up and down as a director. And just when you hear him in interviews and that, he just sounds so smug and up his own arse.
Yeah, he's a bit like that.
That comes across in a lot of his movies, and that's how I feel about Tusk. And I don't really need to set up the plot. I mean, the main setup is then a guy goes missing. He goes to like a mansion for the weekend. It's a while ago I've seen it, but I think it's something to do with he's there to interview like this rich sort of like quite reclusive, like celebrity.
Oh, okay, yeah,
And they're
yeah.
like filming something like some sort of like online interview or something like that, and like the whole thing leads into the horror style plot where like he gets kidnapped and held against his will. They start torturing him, and you can guess from the title Tusk, he's going to be gradually turned into a seal, basically. That's the premise, which obviously can be quite a fun, horror premise when you hear it. But unfortunately, it's in a Kevin Smith film, and so that sums it up. Like, I just think this is a film that thinks it's much clever and more satirical than it actually is watching it, and it's trying to be quite nihilistic in what it does, and I don't think it succeeds at all. The characters are very annoying, as they tend to be in Kevin Smith films. And I just didn't get on board. It's definitely one of those films you either go with it and go on the ride and enjoy it, or you don't. Because this film definitely does have its fans, and the people who love it really seem to get behind it. The acting isn't too bad from memory. I know it's got. Is it Justin Long, the guy out?
Yes, it does have Justin. Yes.
Yeah. And he's not a bad actor. Did decent enough, I find. But the characters in general, I didn't find very interesting to watch. Found them quite annoying. And as I said, it's just that whole thing of watching it. I think it's a really stupid movie. And it's neither entertaining as like a B movie, like entertaining enough, or it's not, as I said, it's not as clever or satirical as it thinks it is. So it hits neither of those two, really, which is sort of what it's going for. So it was a bit of a slog to get through. I've just seen it the once, but it really didn't work for me. And I think because it was one of those films that was trying so hard to be this and be that and be really like edgy and fun, then because it wasn't that, then that makes it look even worse than if it wasn't trying to be those things. So that's Tusk, my number 20.
Fair enough. I've heard of Tusk. As soon as you said Kevin Williams, I was like, oh, okay. I'm not Kevin Williams, Kevin Smith. I was like, okay, it's going to be Tusk. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it, and it pretty much sounds like what you said. You either love it or you hate it. Like there doesn't seem to be an in between. So I haven't checked it out because I'm kind of like you, like Kevin Smith. I don't mind like Mallrats and Dogma and Chasing Amy, but some of his later stuff has just not been. Oh no, sorry, not Mallrats. Clerks has just not been great. So I get what you're saying. I don't think it's a movie that I will check out. So yeah. Number 19, I have a movie that I saw in the cinema, and it was a few years ago, and it was really not fun. Now, when I say the title, you're going to be surprised, but I'll tell you what year it's from. So number 19 is Prom Night from 2008. So not the 1980s one. So I don't mind the original. I know people think it's a bit schlocky and stuff, but I think the original's fun. The remake, however, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's terrible. Like, truly terrible. It's got nothing to do with the original. They go with a completely different story. The only similarity it has is that it's set on prom night. And the story that they go with is like something out of a Law and Order SVU episode. It doesn't even feel like it's a horror film. Basically, it's got Brittany Snow. She's the only noticeable actress that I remember from it. And she plays a young girl who, a year before the movie starts, her entire family were murdered by her high school teacher who was like obsessed with her and wanted to was stalking her. So he killed her whole family. And then it's like a year later, and on prom night, he escapes and starts to stalk her and her friends. It's a really bad premise. It's a really bad movie. It's supposed to be a slasher, but it's not scary at all. It's one of those films where you see the jump scares, you see the kills, you see the attacks coming from a mile away. Like I said, the actual premise is really not that interesting, and they don't really even do anything with it. Like, we've got this girl whose family was slaughtered like a year before the movie starts, and she doesn't even seem that affected by it. Like, they mentioned that like she's on antidepressants, and that's it. And yeah, so basically the movie's just him following her friends around. They have the prom in like some hotel. So they do, I will say the hotel does create an interesting set piece. You've got a couple of kills that at least take place in interesting places, but the kills themselves are really boring, really predictable. And it's one of those movies where it's like, everyone dies except for the person that he's after. So by the time you get to the end of the film, it's like, okay, so you've killed everyone in the film except your actual target. And by the end of the film, poor Brittany Snow's character is just left by herself. Like, she's got no friends, her boyfriend's gone, I think he's killed her family again. So it ends on this really weird, like, downer note. And it's only like an hour and a half, but it's one of those movies that feels like it's going forever. Like, I remember when my friend and I watched it in the cinema, I think we got halfway through it and we were like, is this film over yet? Like, how much longer do we have? So yeah, I've seen it a couple more times since I watched it at the cinema, just to see if maybe I was remembering it as being worse than it is. You know how sometimes you come back to movies and you're like, okay, that actually wasn't as bad. No, this one is as bad. And the fact that it's even associated with the original, which I actually quite enjoy, I just don't like at all. So that's my number 19, Prom Night from 2008.
Yeah, it's a good pick. I can't fault that pick. And good point about it feeling like an SVU episode or something like that. That is a good way to sum it up. So I've seen both. Yeah, I've seen the original. And I agree, the original's pretty enjoyable. I think it's very solid. Obviously, Jamie Lee Curtis in her prime. But yeah, I agree with you on this one. This was just forgettable rubbish. And it does appear, I think, on quite a lot of people's lists when they're doing the worst horror, so
not surprising.
Not really surprising. Okay, so my number 19, the moment of truth for Rachel here. It's a number 3. See, she's already guessed what it is because I said the moment of truth. It is Scream 3. No. It had to be somewhere.
Keith and I are done. After today, you're not seeing us again. It's gone. No, come on.
It's only 19. Right. You should be
Show
happy
your work.
About
that. No, I am appalled that it even made it onto a top 20 worst horror films list, but I will hear you out.
Technically, Tusk is better, but that's only because I've only seen it once. To be fair, it might be above it if I'd seen it more. Yeah, Scream 3, easily the worst Scream movie. It's not even close. It's so neutered. It goes for a Hollywood satire, but it's a very limp Hollywood satire. The jokes are so cliched. They've been done hundreds of times before in other movies and TV shows. The cast are the best thing about it, but largely they're wasted. There's some fun humour with the two Gales, with those actresses. That's the highlight of the movie. The rest is pretty forgettable shit. The kills are crap. It has a terrible opening sequence, which is
I will agree with that.
So confusing and baffling. And the Scream franchise is obviously known for its opening sequences, laying down a marker. So this is easily the worst opening sequence of any Scream movie.
I do agree with that, at the very least.
And that sums it up, really. It's just a very boring movie to watch. The characters and what they're doing are pretty boring. I think if the jokes were better, like, I would get more out of it. But for me, the jokes just feel very recycled and by the book jokes about Hollywood at this point. And then you've got the crappy reveal of the killer and all the retconning in stuff, which isn't needed at this point. And the actor I don't mind too much. He's a decent enough actor, but as a Ghostface, I thought he was a very annoying, uncharismatic Ghostface, and the reveal didn't do anything for me. So I think the main characters who you can normally rely on to carry these movies, I thought they were pretty much underserved as well in the movie. So very forgettable. I've now watched Scream 3 more times than I should have done, and that's it for me. I probably won't watch it again. There's no need anymore. So, Scream 3, that's my number 19.
Yeah.
Truth has been spoken.
Keith's truth. My truth, much better. But oh well, at least it's nice and low on the list. But I'm still I'm going to work. I will get you to realize the hidden genius of that film, because it is fantastic. So Keith is wrong, but that's fine. He often is.
All right.
Okie dokie. Now that we've got that out of the way, we can have fun with the rest of the list, because I won't get insulted by any of your other choices, hopefully. All right. So at number 18, I have a science fiction horror movie that came out, I think, in the mid 2010s. It is called The Fourth Kind. And it has Mila Jovovich in it. So the reason that this is on this list is, okay, so The Fourth Kind is about a town in Alaska where disappearances have been happening. And there is a shrink played by Mila Jovovich who has been interviewing people who have either been connected to these missing people or have had like experiences where they've gone missing and come back. And it's supposed to reveal like this alien conspiracy. But the reason I didn't like this film is because of the way it was marketed and then the way it was presented. So they very much marketed this film as a true story. And basically the film is a mixture of the actors, and then what they try to tell you is real footage from like these real tapes and everything. So they actually cast someone as the character that Mila Jovovich is supposedly playing on screen. So you've got her playing Dr. Abigail Tyler, and then you've got apparently the real Abigail Tyler, except the whole thing was just complete bullshit, and it kind of lessens your enjoyment of the film. It's also a bit of a messy film. It goes a bit kind of all over the place. There's like some secret with the doctor herself that gets revealed towards the end that gets very messy and very weird and convoluted. A lot of the alien stuff is not done that well. I will say there are a couple of moments that I remember being a little bit effectively scary, but for the most part, the film was just, really weird. It was like they didn't quite know what to do with this premise, and they didn't quite know how to sell this whole, it's actually a real story, but you could kind of tell as soon as you started watching it that no, this isn't a real story. Like, you've obviously made the documentary parts yourself. And the part that told me absolutely 100% this is not real is they show a supposed death on screen, like a real death. And I'm like, okay, there's no way you could put a real death into a Hollywood film, because then we'd just be watching a snuff film. So yeah, I don't mind Mila Jovovich. I don't love her. I think it depends on the role that she's in. So sometimes she's okay, but in this one I thought she was miscast. I don't really remember any of the other characters because I found them quite forgettable. And I did find the way the movie jumps between the supposed real footage and the filmed footage can be very jarring and almost repetitive sometimes, because you'll see a scene that's been recreated and then you'll see the real scene and it's like, well, we just watched this. Why are we watching this again? So very weird, very convoluted. I don't always love when science fiction gets mixed with horror. Like, sometimes it can be done really well, and then other times it's a bit hit or miss, and this was definitely a miss. So it's a film I only saw it twice. I might revisit it to see if it's as bad as I remember, but I do remember the second time I watched it being like, okay, yeah, no, this is not good. So that's, yeah, just not it was an interesting premise, and I think if they hadn't sold it the way they tried to sell it by saying, oh, it's a true story, this town has had more disappearances than any other town, and apparently the actual town itself like issued a statement and was like, yeah, that's not actually true, it's a very safe town to come to, like, don't listen to this movie. So yeah, it was just a bit of a disappointment and just not a very well put together movie. So that's my number 18, The Fourth Kind.
And even the title is such a cheap rip-off because it's referencing Close Encounters, pretty much. So, so that's quite annoying.
Yeah.
I know very little about the movie until you just mentioned it. I've heard of it, and I think I knew she was the lead, but apart from that, I didn't really know much. So, yeah, it always looked like one which would be very generic and forgettable.
Yeah, but, it was.
18, it's another third movie in the franchise. And I don't know if you would have seen this one or not, but my number 18 is Jeepers Creepers 3.
Oh, I haven't seen that, but I know all about the Jeepers Creepers franchise.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah. Okay. Have you seen the other two movies? Or
I've seen the first. I know I've definitely seen the first one. I think I've seen parts of the second one, but I've definitely seen the first one. I remember the first one very clearly.
Okay, so that's partly why this film was so disappointing and so annoying, because I actually quite like the first two movies.
Me too.
Like the first one, I think, is a good creature feature with quite an original idea, or at least a different twist on maybe an older idea. And the second one, as sequels go, it isn't bad neither. You know, it's solid enough as a sequel. But so I was quite excited when they brought it back. And the first black mark against the third one is the way they screw us over with the lead actress, because they bring back the lead from the original movie.
Oh, okay.
Who I thought was really good in that original movie. And it was used as a big part of the promotion. And what a rip-off. I mean, I'll spoil it now. It came out in 2017, so chances are, if you're going to see this movie, you've probably seen it by now. But she's in a brief scene at the end. She's hardly in the movie. It's literally
that's
she
so
shows
annoying.
up at the end for a brief appearance and a line, and that just pissed me off because I was waiting all movie, and that was a big part of selling the movie to me. But it's such a terrible movie. Like, at times it feels like more of an action movie, because I guess that they figured out that the horror stuff wasn't really working. Unlike the previous two movies, the creeper isn't like threatening at all. Like the look of him and the way he appears, it's just so like rubbery and quite cheesy, and there's no suspense to it like there was in the original two movies. So it's a really badly directed movie with no threat, cheesy, but really boring movie. Like, it's not entertaining, scary in any kind of way. The ending obviously pissed me off because I expected that actress to play quite a big part in the movie, and chances are it would have been a little bit better as a movie if she was involved more. But it was that almost added insult to her injury. That was the final nail in its coffin, and it was already a bad movie. But I've only seen it the once, but I think it had to make the list just because of how much it pissed me off. It's easily the worst of the franchise. Up to that point, I know there was a new one that came out in the last couple of years, but I haven't seen that yet. I heard it wasn't that great, and there might just be something to this franchise where it was a little bit lightning in the bottle, and after the first couple of movies, is there that much more you can do with the premise? Probably. It feels like there's really, because I think this one, the third one, as I said, 2017 it came out, and I think that's quite some time after the second movie, and sometimes that's a bit of a mistake, like bringing them back like that after all this time. It can be a mistake. So maybe that's what the recent movie suffered from as well. Even though it was different director and stuff, that one. But
I haven't seen number 3. I did quite like number 1 because I thought it was effectively creepy, and I thought the creature was an interesting twist. And I thought the two leads were really good. Obviously, the whole franchise is a little bit tainted at the moment because of the director and all the accusations against him, which, Hollywood, man. But the first movie was solid. So it's a pity that the sequels went downhill. But I do think, having such a big gap between like the second one and the third one would definitely have affected it. And now I don't have to watch it, so that's cool. Now I know when I revisit the series you just watch 1 and 2 and stop there. So good stuff. Plus I understand when a movie pisses you off and you just want to like just have a rant at it, because it's like, come on man, pull it together. So that's very cool. Alrighty, so my number 17 is another remake from the mid-2000s. Another remake just failed horribly and was awful, and that is When a Stranger Calls from 2006. So this is a remake of the classic movie, obviously from the 70s, but it is truly terrible. So the premise is that a babysitter is alone in the house. She gets a phone call saying, "Have you checked on the children?" And she goes to check on the children, and then it's like you find out that the calls are coming from inside the house. It's an old trope. This being a remake, so this had Camilla Bell, I think her name was. She was a bit up and coming in the early to mid 2000s. Also had Tessa Thompson and the guy who's from the Avengers, who plays Coulson. Can't remember his name at the moment. Greg something or the other. So the cast is okay. Greg Clark, that's the one. But it's basically you spend the majority of the movie with Camilla Bell's character in the house. So when that happens, you need a charismatic lead. You need a lead that's going to carry the movie. And unfortunately, Camille Bell, she really didn't. Her character, if I remember correctly, was quite a flat character. She couldn't really play the horror beats well. She couldn't really play the scared beats well. The house, if I remember correctly, because I've only seen this movie once, it was so bad I never went back to it. The house was an okay set piece because it was a more modern house. I remember it was one of those ones that had a lot of glass and it was like multi-story. So there was a lot of stuff that they could have done with it, but they kind of didn't. And I also remember a lot of the scares were very cheap. We talked about cheap jump scares before. This movie had a lot of them. And there was also a lot where, if I remember correctly, like nothing happened. I feel like they wanted to do that kind of, that slow burn kind of horror that you sometimes can get in an old haunted house where you slowly build up the tension, except it didn't really build anything, this movie. It was just really dull until you get to like the climax where the guy breaks into the house and you have like the fight and the face off and everything. But even that was really not good. Like I just remember being so bored by this movie, which was a real pity because I don't think the original is that much better. Like I think what people say about the original, how the first 25 minutes is the best, I agree with, because again, when the original, and of course at the time, this was a very, very new concept because I think this came out just before Black Christmas. So that the calls are coming from inside the house, especially back in the day, before we had mobiles and you only had a landline. So you knew that they absolutely had to be in your house. Much scarier. Whereas being made in 2006, it just didn't have that same tension. And like I said, just a really boring film. Really, you only stayed with one character. I think she might have had like a sassy friend. You always have the sassy friend to offset the kind of more quiet character that maybe came in for a bit. I don't remember a lot of like kills in this one either. I think it was more trying to be like, tension and atmosphere, except it didn't really have either of both. So just a really, like I said, this movie it commits the cardinal sin. It was just boring, like really, really boring, and just nothing on the original. So yeah, I mean, I can't really say much else about it because it was really just that blah of a film. So that's my number 17, When a Stranger Calls from 2006.
Okay, yeah, it's another one I'm on board with. I can't argue, and I like your logic because once again, it pales in comparison to the original, which is so much more original, especially at the time, and just as a horror movie, just so more engaging, exciting. Cal Kane, isn't it, in the original? And
yes,
again,
I think
that's
so.
Kind of
her
to Camille Bell. There's no contest really. Like the original quite a bit. We'll definitely do it someday, and it is a bit different than the original, which I do like because you assume it's going to be all set in the house throughout the movie, and then actually half of it isn't, and I quite like that. Then they do something different in the back half. Number 17, which I guess I would say is boring, but in a different way, different sort of movie, and chances are you've not even heard of this one. But unfortunately, it's a bit of a franchise. My number 17 is a film called Camp Blood.
Oh, I've heard of it. Never seen it, but I have heard of it.
You've heard of it. Maybe through reputation. I think it is one that appears on a lot of these lists. And I think there's 4 of bloody things. And I mean, when you watch the first one, you'll see how, that's really stretching the point. But these are like the bottom of the barrel basement when it comes to just really low budget student style movies. In fact, call it a student movie might be an insult to student movies, but it's one of those where like the sound editing is so bad, like everything's sort of out of focus. The acting feels below like soap opera standards of acting. It's really kind of very sleazy, as these movies tend to be. It's very repetitive. You hardly see any good gore because the budget isn't there to really do them. So there's a lot of like chopping around, and yeah, it just follows these characters. It's very much like very similar to the premise of Friday the 13th, but obviously a much more low budget, like subgrade type version of that. Obnoxious characters, but not really in an interesting or entertaining type way. And these sorts of movies, as you know, Rachel, I can enjoy when they are like so bad they're good, or so entertaining they're good. But this really wasn't. Like, there's probably a couple of moments which I got a chuckle out of, but in general it was more of a slog to watch. And it's a novelty type film. There is some enjoyment of saying, yeah, I could have probably have put together a better shot than that. I probably could have directed this movie. There is some fun to that side, because you very rarely say that when you're watching a movie. So it is those sorts of movies. Now, I have to say, I have seen the second one as well. The second one, which came out the year after, it is very much riffing off the Blair Witch and that kind of thing. It's in that sort of timeline, and I think I was getting a little bit of Blair Witch vibes from the first one, but because it came out in '99, it was probably too close to the Blair Witch. But I could definitely see that sort of vibe with some of what they would call satire in the second one. And it was hard to, it was hard to decide which one was worse. I think in the end I went for this one because the second one probably had more so silly, it's actually reasonably fun type moments than this one. Like, because with the second one you get a whole like they're basically almost doing the Scream thing of like they're doing a movie based on the original movie, and there's just some really hilariously cheesy bad audition scenes. But before we move on, actually, I should just mention that the first Camp Blood is one of those movies that is just so low budget. Then bearing in mind it's a very small cast anyway, but they actually reuse two of the same actors for the end scene, but in different roles. And it's like, what the fuck? You've been watching them all movie. There's no way people aren't going to notice that they're the same guys. I couldn't believe what I was watching.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It's hilarious. So that's Camp Blood, which, not surprisingly, is free on YouTube. So go and knock yourself out. That's my number 17.
I think I'm going to have to go and check this out just to see how bad it is, because you've made it sound very intriguing. So that would be. I particularly want to see this actor swap at the end of the movie. That could be very interesting. No, I have heard of them, and I obviously assumed that they were a bit of a Friday the 13th ripoff. I mean, the name alone, Camp Blood, is just implying that it's going to be that sort of setting. But you've actually made me curious to watch it just as like a let's do a hate watch of something. Let's just watch something really bad on a Sunday afternoon. So maybe I'll go and find it for free on YouTube and see how it goes. So that's pretty funny. Alrighty. So my number 16 is a sequel that should never have been made. It's a sequel to a movie. The original movie is a brilliant movie, a very highbrow psychological thriller, and then they went and made a slasher sequel to it. So my number 16 is American Psycho 2 from 2002.
Okay.
So, as we all know, the original American Psycho is a great film. Christian Bale is fantastic. The whole movie's a great psychological thriller. Absolutely, just a very disturbing movie, but very good movie. American Psycho 2 is just, okay, first of all, the killer in this movie is played by Mila Kunis. No one is looking at Mila Kunis and thinking you are a serial killer. What they do with this movie is they retcon the original movie. So we find out that apparently at some point during his killing spree, Patrick Bateman murdered a young babysitter. And while he murdered this babysitter, he left the child that she was babysitting alive. That child grows up to be Mila Kunis. Her name is Rachel. And she has become a criminal psychology student who wants to get into the FBI, but is also so traumatized from what she saw Patrick Bateman do that she's decided to become a serial killer herself. And basically the whole movie is about her, on campus getting away with these murders while one of her professors, who by the way is played by William Shatner. So that's fantastic. Yes, is trying to catch her. And it was one of those early 2000s slashers where it has a very thin plot. I mean, Mila Kunis is doing her best, but no one is thinking Jackie Burkhart could be a serial killer. So, it just doesn't work. If I remember correctly, the kills are really bad. Mila Kunis is a great actress, but she can't do threatening and she can't do serial killer, and it just really lets down the whole movie. Plus the fact that they tacked this onto American Psycho, which is such a great film and, has that kind of implication at the end of like, is it in Patrick's mind or is it real? Whereas this very much says, no, it's real. He was a serial killer and he killed these people, and this girl is now messed up because of his serial killing, and she's become a serial killer herself. The only part of the movie I actually didn't mind is that she actually gets away with it at the end. Spoiler alert. Sorry, that's a little bit after the fact, but she gets away with it at the end, and she actually does go on to become an FBI agent. So it's a little bit of an FU at the end, with the character. She reveals to William Shatner's character that, she's still alive because they thought in the big showdown that she died. And the movie kind of ends with him watching her, I remember correctly, like walking out of the room, like with this oh shit moment. But like the rest of it is just so bad. Everything from the casting choice to the script to the kills to the fact that they decide to tack it onto the end of a movie that is so highly regarded. And what's really funny is I actually saw this movie before I saw the original movie. So when I saw the original movie and saw how different it was, I was like, wow, why would they ever make that sequel? So I think it was loosely based on like a pulp novel that someone wrote, which was like a non-canon continuation of the original novel. But yeah, it was really, really bad. And I know I keep saying this, but Mila Kunis, really? Mila Kunis is a serial killer? For one thing, she's like this big. And secondly, like no one is looking at her and thinking that she's threatening. So exactly. I think maybe if I revisited it, it might fall into so bad it's good, but probably not. I think it's just a schlocky little slasher from the early 2000s. I mean, not the most offensive or, worst movie ever, but definitely not great. And obviously made worse by the fact that they have attached it to American Psycho, which is just such a great movie. So that's my number 16, American Psycho 2, starring Mila Kunis as a terrifying serial killer. So there it is.
Good stuff. I've seen bits of it. I don't think I've seen the whole movie. I think I saw bits of it on TV, and it did look a very unconvincing mess.
Yes.
Yeah. You're right. It's definitely made all the worse the fact that it's attached to such a great first movie, and definitely a movie that didn't need a sequel in any case. But
no.
Yeah, this does sound bad. I mean, obviously, I'm a pretty big William Shatner fan, so I guess I might give it a point for that. But that's maybe about it. But we'll see. I guess we might have to do them one day. There's at least 3, isn't there? American Psycho.
I think so. I think there actually is another one, which is really odd. So we'll have to see if we can find that.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, good pick. So my number 16 is, I'm pretty sure, the oldest film on my list. It's from the late 70s, and it's a movie which you can find on Shudder, or at least Shudder in the UK, if you've got that. And it is called The Meat Cleaver Massacre, or just Meat
Oh, that sounds awesome. Oh
it's a great title. The title may be the best thing about it.
Yeah.
So the premise for this one, which I'll set up because not many people probably have seen it, or maybe it's a bit of a forgotten movie, is that you have these really quite nasty slacker-style students who are always getting like ripped on by their quite highbrow professor who feels they're slacking off, not really paying attention in class. So they decide to get revenge on him, and they hospitalize him and they kill his whole family. So it's that kind of movie. So it becomes a revenge movie, and what happens is he summons like the dark arts, like a cult, to get revenge on them. And if that doesn't sound dumb enough, what makes it even dumber is that for pretty much the whole movie, as I said, he is hospitalized and he's pretty much in a coma. So he's actually doing it through his mind, like he's like contacting me,
Awesome.
like this, whatever it's meant to be, some sort of like satanic cult or something, and just rise to him. And that becomes the movie. It's like him slowly getting revenge on these really nasty characters. So you've got a flavour of just how dumb the plot for this movie is, and just how dumb watching it is. Another thing which is like a funny footnote to it is it's got Christopher Lee in, but really briefly. And as I was watching it, I couldn't see him. I thought, well, where's Christopher Lee? And I read up on it after the movie, and he has a voiceover at the beginning and the end of the movie. And to make it even more funny, the original monologue with Christopher Lee isn't even from this movie. It's from another movie, which I guess didn't see the light of day, so they just
they just reused it.
I mean, it's possible Christopher Lee might not even know that his voiceover is in this movie, maybe. But whole movie to watch. As I said, the premise is really stupid. It's kind of going for this quite nihilistic, gritty 70s feel, but because it is so silly in everything that's doing, and the characters are like really dull to watch, then it just doesn't hit those notes. I mean, it kind of has that 70s look, but it's just really badly directed and dull. So it never really pulls that off like it's going for. Like, because it is, I think, going for a more sadistic revenge type movie. But because you've got this really cheesy, like, satanic supernatural plot sort of shoot in, you just can't take it seriously. And the other problem is it follows, like, the villains for a lot of the movie. Like, you do follow them in their day-to-day life, and because they're just so nasty but not like the most interesting people to watch, that definitely drags the movie down as well. And as I said, the whole stuff with like the professor and him doing this from a coma is just so cheesy. I'm probably making it sound more entertaining than the actual movie is. Again, it's one that I've seen appear on these sorts of lists, so it was one which I thought was worth watching for the first time. And when I saw Christopher Lee was in it, I was like, oh, okay. It's pretty bad, but it's one to tick off anyway. As I said, it's on Shudder. Meet Cleaver Massacre from 19...
I love that title. That title is everything.
It is a great title.
Brilliant. That's a great title. Brings to mind some very fun images. Well, I might have to go and check that one out. Again, you're giving me lots of bad movies to watch now, so that if we ever redo this list in the future, maybe some of them will pop up on there. That's cool. All right. So my number 15, all of mine seem to be coming from the 2000s, mid-2000s era. It was not a great era for horror, although this one's more later 2010s. So this is another sequel that just was not necessary. I think this is the third movie in this franchise. It might be the fourth. And this is Rings from 2017, which is obviously a sequel from The Ring. So The Ring is one of my favorite horror films. I know that we've talked about this and you're not as big a fan of it as I am, but I really love it. This was one of the first horror films I ever saw when I was first getting into horror, and I love the original. I remember the sequel was not as good, but it was okay because they brought back Naomi Watts and that was all right.
Yeah.
But this one...
Well, I was going to say, I was going to jump in there because you should make it clear you're talking of the American Ring.
Yes.
Because obviously a lot of
we're
people
talking about the
think,
American Ring. Yes, not the Japanese, not Ringu. We're talking about the Ring. So yes. So then there was the sequel, but then in 2017 they brought out Rings, which is kind of more of like a distant sequel. So it doesn't really have anyone from the original in it, and it's only vaguely connected. So it starts where you have this couple, and they're going on a road trip, I think, and then one of them reveals that they have watched the videotape, the Samara videotape. So then they decide to go looking for answers about the legend of Samara. And if I remember correctly, it ends up retconning some of what is in the original film. It ends up doing things a little bit differently. It ends up with like a slightly different mythology surrounding Samara. So it kind of messes all that up. But again, as with a lot of the films that I have listed on here, it was just really boring. I saw this in the cinema with my sister. Now, this movie is like the king of bad jump scares. It seemed like every 10 minutes there was some sort of like jump scare that you would just see coming from a mile away. I think there was only one jump scare in the whole movie that actually got me. And the rest were they were just terrible. Like literally like every 10 seconds, boom, boom. It was like, what are you trying to do? Like, this is not good storytelling. The main character I remember finding really annoying. Like, I just wanted her to die, and she just wouldn't. And yeah, again, it's one of those films that left so little an impression on me that I can barely even remember it. Like, I just remember walking out of the cinema and being like, I want that last hour and a half of my life back. Like, that was so boring. Like, why did we just spend $25 on a ticket to see that? And again, I think it's tainted because it is linked to what is, in my opinion, a really good first movie. Like, The Ring was very highly praised when it was released. You know, it was one of the few American remakes that a lot of people were saying was as good as the original. Again, that is subject to opinion. But I remember The Ring was very highly praised. And like I said, I love The Ring. It's one of my top 10 favorite horror movies. I think it's so effective. And this one just had nothing on that. I think they tried to like adopt the color palette and, you know, they tried to make it look similar to the original, but it just wasn't working. And I don't mind movies adding mythology. Like, if you build mythology well and lore well, you can add things in a way that's organic. But what I don't like is when they just come out of nowhere and like retcon things or just completely change. Like in this one, they decide that they have to like cremate Samara's bones. So then they have to go and find them and they're like buried somewhere. But it's like, didn't they get her out of the well at the yeah, it contradicts the first movie a lot and it's just really annoying. And like I said, the cardinal sin, it's boring. It was just so boring and it was not scary at all. And it was such a disappointment because, again, similar to like the previous one, I said American Psycho 2 is linked to a movie that, in my opinion, is so good. This one is linked to a movie that I really love and that I really did find quite scary. And it's just so boring. So it was definitely a sequel that did not need to be made. I'm guessing it was made just to cash in on the original and try and get some money and, you know, drum some business up for the studio. But it was a completely unnecessary sequel. And again, it doesn't add anything to the original. Sequels should at least add something to the original. You know, they should add something to the world, or they should make the original better, or they should do something. But this just did nothing. Like, it literally could have just been a different film, and they've just decided to connect it to Rings because they can. So to The Ring because they can. So yeah, that's my number 15. Another very boring, overly saturated with jump scares movie, Rings from 2017.
Yeah, I've not seen this one, but everything I hear about it backs up what you're saying. Then it is really bad, and I've got to say also, holy shit, cinema in Australia is expensive. All going to the movies.
It is.
Well, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
My number 15. It's a movie from our favourite franchise, Rachel. It is a Wrong Turn movie.
Yeah,
and
nice.
This might not be the last Wrong Turn movie on my list, I've got to say. But for now, I've gone with Wrong Turn 2. So the first sequel, and it's really a testament to how bad this franchise got. Then, in comparison, this might not be as bad as what I'm saying now. Like, the franchise definitely got even worse after this one, but it's just so funny then it takes such a nosedive after what's
I know, right?
it is a very credible like first movie, but yeah, it's really bad from the off with the effects, the acting, the kills are pretty lame. This one is set in the forest. They try and keep it reasonably close to. But even that, they go a bit contrived, because I remember there's something to do with they're shooting a porn movie, or it was something like that.
Right.
There was like a porn actress, and
Yeah.
and that's what's so hilarious about the Wrong Turn franchise and premise. We said this, then after the first movie, they're really scratching and doing everything they can just to work Wrong Turn into it. So, for example, in the third movie, and I'm not saying yet whether that appears or not, but they obviously really convoluted. It's the prison one, when they're on the prison bus, and that takes a wrong turn, and that's how we get the horror come into play with that one. But like we've said many times, such a convoluted, really thin premise to stretch over 7 movies as it was eventually. And yeah, I won't say much else, because we've talked about them extensively when we covered them. I know Henry Rollins has a part in this movie, and he's normally a very entertaining, charismatic presence. But even he, I thought, was phoning it in a little bit in this one. So very bad sequel, but scary, the fact that there was much worse to come. But for now, Wrong Turn 2, my 50.
Nice. Well, I think we both knew that they were going to turn up. I won't say whether or not any of them are on my list, but as we were watching them, I mean, all you guys need to do is go and watch our reviews to see how highly we thought of that franchise. So not surprised to see at least one entry on your list, and won't be surprised if more turn up. So yes, neither of us liked. I mean, the first one was not too bad. I remember we both didn't mind the first one, and then it just seemed to get progressively worse and worse and worse with every film. It was like, I remember us saying, how can these get any worse? And then they did. They just proved us wrong over and over. Yeah. So it's a miracle that they got so many films when they're just so bad. It's just very funny. So we'll see if any of them turn up on either of our lists as we keep going. Alrighty. So my number, where are we up to now? Number 14 is kind of a remake, kind of a reimagining. It's another film from 2000, and it's a science fiction horror, and that is Hollow Man, starring creepy Kevin Bacon. So this is basically a modern version of The Invisible Man, and I think I was watching a horror documentary, I can't remember what it was, but someone basically put it very, very well. This is basically, I'm invisible, time to rape. And it's just such a creepy movie. Look, Kevin Bacon is a creepy dude. He's just got that kind of face, you know. You look at him and you're like, yeah, you are not right. And of course, in this one, he plays the typical mad scientist who's, trying his experiments and they go awry, and he finds out that he's invisible. Now, any iteration of the Invisible Man, obviously he does go a bit mad and he is a bit evil. That's kind of the point, that he gets this power and then he gets a bit drunk off it. And I think that the original particular, the one from the 30s, does a good job of making him kind of humorous while he's killing. I like how he's he'll make a joke and then he'll make a joke about killing someone, and it's kind of interesting. But the 2000 Hollow Man, Kevin Bacon's character, I know he's supposed to be a narcissistic arsehole. That's kind of how the whole movie starts, is, he's this narcissistic scientist. I think his name is Sebastian. I mean, that's just a narcissistic name to begin with. And yeah, so I don't remember a lot of the film. Again, this was one that I saw in the very early 2000s. It was one of the first horror movies I watched. And I just really remember that when this guy becomes invisible, he does so much worse than any other Invisible Man. Like I said, there is a scene where he actually rapes a woman, and it's come on, did you have to go there? And then he's got this kind of snivelly best friend who's played by an actor that I actually do quite like. He's in a lot of different things. I always forget what his name is.
Josh Brolin?
Josh Brolin, that's the one. Yes. Yes, him. And then there's another guy as well that I really, Greg Grunberg, who has been in a lot of different TV things that I've seen. And it's also got Elizabeth Shue, who's not too bad. But
Yeah.
I just remember the whole movie, like, again, The Invisible Man, when you watch it, you're supposed to find his antics a little bit funny. Even while he's doing stuff, like things that are wrong, you're supposed to find him entertaining, but you just don't find Kevin Bacon's character entertaining. Like, once he crosses that line and we have that rape scene, it's like the rest of the movie is just really uncomfortable to watch. And the effects are not too bad, but again, it's nothing that we haven't seen before. It's nothing that they didn't already do in the 1930s, when it's a lot more interesting back then, because, they didn't have CGI and stuff like that. And it does have a very, 2000s look to it. And it was just a really icky movie. I think they just went too far with the premise, and they went too far with trying to make Sebastian like a really despicable guy. And I just remember when I watched this film, just like an air of like extreme discomfort. Like, it wasn't scaring me, it wasn't entertaining me, it was just making me feel really creeped out, and not in a good way, not in a fun way, in more like a this is really wrong and I want this guy to get off my screen kind of way. So yeah, again, another science fiction one that I don't think really merged that well. And I think in the early 2000s we were not very PC, so we I think we got away with doing stuff on screen that we maybe couldn't do today, and would have characters that maybe don't hold up as well today. And I definitely think that Hollow Man does not hold up. I mean, I haven't watched it since the early 2000s. I did see it a couple of times, but I have a feeling that if I revisited it today, I would feel exactly the same way, because it's just just not a great remake and not a great reimagining of a very classic kind of monster. So that's my number 14, Hollow Man from 2000.
Okay, yeah, interesting pick. I've never seen this, or at least I've not seen it all the way through. I might have seen bits of it, and I think the key to some of the stuff you're saying is the director, Paul Verhoeven, because he is very much a provocateur.
That's who. Well, that makes sense. That I know that name. That absolutely makes sense now. Yeah.
Well, he's done some very good movies, but like. Yeah, he always has that in the background, and some of the times he's using it to make a point, and then others I think he is just trying to push buttons and stuff.
And that's what I think he was doing with this one.
That's what I was going to say, because some people would argue this is a bit of a satire and that you've always had this side to the Invisible Man, but I take it you think that's not what they're doing.
I don't, but again, I haven't seen it since the early 2000s, and I'm more film savvy these days. I was young in the early 2000s. I was a teenager, so I was only just starting to learn about film. So maybe if I revisited it, it might come across differently. But yeah, when I first saw it, no, it just came across as gross. And like I said, I just find Kevin Bacon really creepy. There is just something about his face that is just not right.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because obviously Bacon for a long time got a reputation of being actually quite a likable, charismatic leading man.
I'm sure he's lovely, but just something about him.
But then again, a lot of times he does play good villains as well, or at least good sort of slimy characters. So he definitely always has that in the background. So.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I mean, it's one I want to check out to see what I think about it. But I will just give a plug actually to another podcast, because they recently did a review of it, and they were more positive than you. But I'll just say the Ace podcast, or the Atomic Cinema Experiment, they recently reviewed this movie, so go and check out their review, because it's a really interesting review.
Will do. Might give me some different insights into the film too.
Yeah, very good review. Or Fuzz Movies, if you look up that on YouTube, or just put in the Ace, as I said, Atomic Cinema, and maybe the name of the movie. But yeah, I just thought I'd give them a plug, because they recently reviewed this one. So okay, so my number 14 is actually similar along some of the lines you've been with some of your picks, because it's a movie which is a sequel to a very good original movie, a movie that's a bit of a classic and staple in its genre or subgenre. So my number 14 is An American Werewolf in Paris. So the sequel, which is such a lousy sequel, and once again, like, the best way to show what a bad sequel is to kind of talk about the first movie. But of course, we're not here to do that really. But it is such a standout first movie. It's one of the staples and classics in the werewolf genre. It's one of the most original werewolf movies. And this is just such a lazy sequel, which thinks it's kind of doing what it should be just by changing the location, but it has none of the wit, none of like the humor of the first movie. The special effects are way worse than the first movie because that movie was known for really great special effects.
Yes.
It's only really you've at least got a couple of decent leads, like Julie Derpy's in it.
Yes,
I think Tim Roth's in it, from what I can remember.
I think so.
Yeah. So I like both of them, but they're wasted in this movie.
Yes.
It's such a rubbish, forgettable movie. Very boring once again, the cardinal scene, and just it's been a while since I've seen it, but such a ropey movie, and really. Like, it's one thing to say it's a bad movie, but I think it's also a movie that portrays the spirit of the original, because it doesn't even feel like a sequel to like an American Werewolf in London. Like, for a lot of it, it doesn't really feel like a horror movie. It just feels like some, I don't know, quite shallow, cheesy Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
Which just happens to have like a werewolf plot in it. And I think maybe setting it in Paris. I mean, nothing. You can obviously still do a good horror movie in Paris, but maybe the sights in Paris were a bit too pretty as well.
Yeah.
Movie. Whereas London, you can definitely capture some of like the murky sort of undergrowth.
Yes. You've got the gloom and the fog and all of that in London. Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a while, but this is totally forgettable trash, really. So that's my number 14.
So while I absolutely agree with everything that you've said about the movie, it's terrible. I will admit I do have a kind of a little soft spot for this movie because it was one of the first DVDs that I ever owned back in the early 2000s. And I used to watch it a lot. And I actually saw this before I saw the original. So yes, I agree. It's a terrible movie. It's schlocky and over the top and it's not funny. Julie Delpy is definitely wasted in this film. But like I said, because it was one of the earliest DVDs that I owned and it was one of the earliest like horror comedies that I saw, I think I'll always have like a little bit of a soft spot, but I'm probably very much tainted by like a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of like remembering like when I first started my DVD collection. So yeah, I think if I rewatched it now, I probably wouldn't be able to sit through it because I would find it so bad. So I'm just going to keep it like in my memories as like, you know, kind of a little sweet spot, a little guilty pleasure of mine. But I absolutely agree with everything you're saying. So, yeah, cool. All right, so my number 13, again, we're going back to the late 2000s. It's not a good era for horror. And this was kind of a horror/psychological thriller that came out in 2007. It starred Lindsay Lohan, and it was supposed to be one of her, like, bigger movies and getting back into the scene after Mean Girls. And it's called I Know Who Killed Me. This movie is truly terrible. It's trying to be this kind of like deep psychological thriller horror with like color motif and all of this, but it's really, really lame. So basically, Lindsay Lohan plays this girl called Aubrey who is writing this story about this stripper called Dakota. And somehow along the way, like she starts to like dream about this stripper and their lives start to merge. And then Aubrey goes missing. And then they find a girl on the side of the road who looks exactly like Aubrey. She's missing a leg and she's missing a finger. And they think that she's Aubrey. And she keeps insisting that she's Dakota, the stripper from the stories. So you go through the whole movie. Now, I'm going to give spoilers because you really have to find out how stupid this movie really is. All right. So we go through the majority of the movie with Dakota now living in Aubrey's house. And I think the impression you're supposed to get is that Aubrey has been so traumatized by what happened to her. She was kidnapped and some guy cut off her leg and then cut off her finger and was torturing her, that she's like withdrawn into like this persona of Dakota, you know, and you think that eventually it's going to be revealed that Aubrey, you know, was it was Aubrey the whole time. No, what they end up doing with this stupid movie is you find out that Aubrey's and mum actually did have twins, and one of the twins was like given away or something. Exactly. And what is really lame is you're like, okay, so why is she missing a leg and a finger when she wasn't actually kidnapped? You find out that apparently Dakota is just walking down the road one day and her leg just fell off. And we're supposed to believe that it's because the real Aubrey was kidnapped. And as the torturer is torturing her, Dakota, the twin, is getting the physical effects of the torture. And the movie ends with Dakota like managing to figure out who kidnapped Aubrey and like going to like the place where they've buried Aubrey alive and digging her up. And then the movie ends with the two twins side by side. But it's such a weird swerve in the middle of the movie to suddenly be like, oh no, they're actually twins. Like Dakota was actually a stripper whose leg just fell off one day. And it was just like poor Lindsay. I've always been on Lindsay's side. I've always thought that she's actually a really great actress and that Hollywood just kind of destroyed her. And so when I watched her in this movie, I was like, sweetie, what are you doing? You are so much better than this movie. And it is just the weirdest. And like I said, it tries to do all this like symbolism where like Aubrey is always in blue and Dakota's always in red. And you're supposed to like, there's like some weird owl symbolism as well, which doesn't make sense anywhere. Like it is just the most convoluted, stupid movie I have seen in ages. And I pretty much only watched it because I'm such a big Lindsay fan and I will watch a lot of crap for her because I think she's great. But no, this movie is truly terrible. And like I said, it doesn't make any sense. It could have been interesting, but it just ended up being really, really crap. So that's my number 13. I Know Who Killed Me. Don't even bother to check it out. It's just that bad. I would not recommend this to anyone.
And I think we know who killed the box office for that movie. It's whoever wrote the damn thing.
Absolutely. Oh, it's so bad.
Without doubt, I lost the will to live when you were describing the plot right there. So I can only imagine what watching the actual movie is like.
Yep.
I've never seen it. I think I vaguely remember it coming out and being a thing, but I don't think I've seen it. And I'm with you on Lohan. It's something I was going to say actually. Like her decline has been really sad to watch because in Mean Girls and like one or two other films, she definitely had her kind of niche, you know, her sort of, you know, like quite comedic, quite charming and quirky. She definitely had the niche for a while, and it's very sad to see the way her career's gone. Number 13 is the most recent film on my list. It's from this year. It's a streaming movie. It's actually come out in the last few weeks. Yeah, you probably know which one because I reviewed it on the channel. So because of that, I won't say much because there's a review up. But it's got an appropriate title as well because it's called Bad Things.
Oh, yes, I did see your... Yes, I saw that pop up. I haven't watched the review yet, but okay. Cool.
There's some very bad things in this movie. So it's another one that has a bit of a footnote because it does have a cameo appearance from Molly Ringwald in it. She shows up, and unfortunately she's not in it more, otherwise it could have been a better movie. But I mean, she's in it a decent amount, but it is very much a cameo performance, so it's not enough to save the movie in any way. But the premise is then the mother of this girl has recently passed away, so she's like recovering from that. So she decides to go a weekend away to like this snowy retreat, this resort. And it's a resort she now owns because her mother owned it originally. So it's been passed down in her will. So to try and get away, she and her friends go for the weekend. And that's when we start getting the horror plot. Like weird stuff starts to happen. And they try to leave at one point, but they end up back in the same spot. And you get like a horror style plot where they slowly start getting killed off. Weird stuff starts to happen. Yeah. And that's kind of the whole vibe of it. But It's a really boring, generic movie. Like, the characters are very annoying to watch. They come off as quite preachy, arty types, so they're very hard to sit through.
Yeah.
And the acting is very bad. Like, as I said, Molly Ringwald is, like, definitely the best actress in the movie quite easily, and she's not really in the movie that much. It's a very repetitive movie, and it's the sort of thing that's definitely an example of, like, straight to streaming, like, at its lowest sort of form, in a way, where you can see this is such a cheap, like, straight to streaming type movie. It's not really scary. Some of the things that it does, or some of the ideas, when you think about them, it does sound like it could be quite a fun movie, because they do this kind of almost what is in the character's head type thing, or they do this idea of they think they've escaped, but then they end up back in the same place. And on paper, that can be good if it's well done, but, like, it's really not well done. And also, again, because it's a very cheap movie, they really skimp on the deaths, so the deaths aren't really that gory or, like, entertaining to watch. And yeah, it just plods along. It's a very dull movie. It's also a very predictable movie. Like, I won't go much into, like, spoilers, because it's a recent movie, but, like, yeah, there's a certain thing with the mother character, and I think for a while they even treat it as a bit of suspense than like, the Molly Ringwald character is, like, playing the mother, but it was pretty obvious for me for so long, really.
Yeah. Sounds like it is a fitting title. I'll have to go and watch your review to see what you really thought about it. But yeah, no, that's, like, I mean, the words you're using, you know, predictable, boring, this is all the stuff that we're talking about. Like, this is not what you want in a horror film. So Molly Ringwald cameo, always good, but it does sound like the rest of it's not great. So might give that one a skip, I think. Alrighty. So my number 12 is a movie that I know you will definitely agree should be on this list. It'll be interesting to see if it turns up on your list, and if it does, if it's higher, like whereabouts it is. But I'm going to one of the franchises that we do love, but this is an outlier in that franchise. So my number 12 is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. So that's where I'm going to go with that. So I debated which of the Rob Zombies to put in here, because quite frankly, they're both atrocious, as we have talked about. Excuse me. So yes, so terrible movies, both of them. But I think the problem with Halloween 2 is that it just goes completely off the rails. At least the first one, I still think that Zombie struggles with trying to find his own voice, and at least in the second one, it's very much just him and not Carpenter coming in. But there's so much wrong with this movie. First of all, you have that opening sequence, which goes for like 25 minutes, you know, where you have like these really gory deaths and, like, you know, a lot of, you know, stuff happening. And then it all turns out to just be a dream. And it really feels like Zombie, like, started writing the script, wrote himself into a corner, went, oh crap, what can I do? And just went, okay, fine, it'll be a dream sequence. And it's just like 25 minutes of the film, just completely wasted. I also think that I think the characterization of Laurie is once again really off. You know, this is a character we're supposed to root for. This is a character we're supposed to like. And she's just really horrible and really unlikable. And that whole weird thing with, like, her seeing, like, Jason and not Jason, Michael and the horse and Michael's mother and the white dress and everything. It's just really convoluted. Like, we've talked before about how neither of us are a massive fan of Zombie. I mean, I appreciate that he has his own style, and I appreciate that he does what he wants to do and doesn't, you know, really care about anything else. But it's like, sometimes it's like, okay, but you have to look at, like, what sort of movie you're making. Too violent, too over the top. I think the only scene in in Halloween 2 that I found effective is there is a great shot where Annie, the character played by from Halloween 4. Danielle Harris, yes. So in the first of Rob Zombie's film, she is brutally attacked by Michael but survives. And in the new one, there is a scene where she's in her kitchen and she sees Michael again. And the way that it's filmed, you can really feel her terror. But literally, that's it. I mean, we've done a review of the film. It's an absolute mess. I think I gave it like 0.5 or something, because it was just terrible. So it's a pity that it's kind of I mean, I still think that the guy who plays Michael is really good, but in this one, he's Grizzly Adams, which is always interesting. Oh, that's right, and he like fights a dog or something, or eats a dog or something in this one. Like, there's all sorts of really weird crap in this one. So I'm going to put that in at number 12. Like I said, I debated whether to put this one or the first one in. I do think the first one is slightly better just because it follows the original storyline a bit more. So I think the first one is more cohesive as a story, whereas the second one, it's like, what is even happening here? Like, what are we supposed to be following? I mean, it has that really weird ending. So yeah, we've done a review of this one. There's not much more I need to say. So that's my number 12, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that, and I would probably agree that as crap as the original and the remake of the original is, I'd say this one is just a little bit worse than it. We'll return to Zombie probably later, but like, it's fair to say the guy for me has made some of the worst horror movies in history.
Yeah.
So, number 12, I'm returning to a franchise movie, and it's the fifth Paranormal Activity movie. So Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, is the...
Oh, okay. I haven't seen this one.
Yeah, they're doing that classic thing of it's got to the fifth movie and they're trying to distract you from it being a sequel. So they've knocked off the number and put a subtitle in. And so this is one where this was the first time watch, and it follows like these students who have just graduated. They're like Hispanic, and a woman downstairs from them, because you've got like siblings, a woman who lives downstairs, she is talking about like this sort of curse of a witch, and then she shows up dead, and that's when like the supernatural plot kicks in, and they do a whole thing at the end of the movie where they tie it back into the original movie. So they're sort of doing all this, but it's a very dull movie once again to watch, very generic with the jump scares. And once again, I think just when it comes to the found footage and compared to what the first movie did, because the first Paranormal Activity movie is a bit of an indie gem, like people sort of forget. Then this was before found footage had been just so overkill and overdone. And the first one actually is a really interesting movie and
I agree.
Pretty well done. And I haven't seen all of the sequels, so I haven't seen a lot of them actually, so I'll be honest about that. But I know for a few movies at least it was meant to have been pretty decent, and I know some of the way they expanded on some of the mythology is meant to be quite interesting, but the way this ends I really didn't like at all. The characters were pretty dull and quite annoying. I think one of them wasn't too bad. The acting isn't like terrible, I'd say that, but I think it really takes the gimmick though of found footage a little too far and a little too literal, where you're just following them around in their everyday doing really boring things in their apartment and just doing things that no one has any interest of seeing on film, and you sort of wonder why they're doing it. And what's really dumb, and what is probably the low light of the film, is then when weird stuff starts to happen and they start having this stuff with like the witch and they realize things are happening to them, they don't freak out. They actually quite enjoy it. Like they actually have this idea, wouldn't it be cool, we've got these they treat it as like they've got these superpowers, and they actually start filming this stuff with it, and like the stuff when one of them is like flying through the air and just things like that. They actually do like sort of home movies almost, and where they get, and this is just so dumb. It's just such a dumb reaction, and there's a lot of dumb stuff in the movie because you even get like a subplot involving gangs. This movie actually does that. It's ridiculous.
So random.
Yeah, I guess they're just scraping the bottom of the barrel with it, but it's It's a really dumb movie, and the mythology and the way it adds to it, and the ending of the movie. I know for some people, like I think they've said they quite like the ending, but I didn't like it. I didn't like the way it was just. It was so dumb. Like we didn't have to return to the original in that sort of way. I think it's definitely one of those endings where they're trying to be a bit too clever with like tying it to the original. But yeah, you can just tell by some of the things I've described, and it's a really dumb movie. But yeah, it's pretty forgettable, really, overall. So. That's obviously another franchise we will do at some point, but Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, is my number 12.
Okay. I've only seen the first two of the Paranormal Activities, but I honestly think it was a movie that, I mean, you can say this about a lot of films, but I think particularly with this one, it did not need a sequel. Like, that first film, I think, is really good and really interesting. It is the most, I think, profitable independent film of all time when you look at the budget that it was made on versus how much it actually made. It is supposed to be, like, quite up there. And I think the original is really good. So, yeah, tacking on sequels and then making it, like, a big mythology lore thing, I can see where that would get like annoying, but yeah, we will have to check out the whole franchise at some point. I mean, I didn't mind number 2. It wasn't fantastic, but it was okay, but I really like that first one, and I think that first one is very effectively scary and it's done really well, and yeah, it just did not need a sequel. It would have just stood up by itself. So that's interesting that it sounds like the sequels do get progressively worse as they go along, which I think makes sense because it's a thin premise to begin with, and simple premises I think work best when they're just contained to one movie. So yeah, I can see how that might get worse and worse as it goes along. For my number 11, we are going to the 1980s with a film that I think its sequels are technically worse than the first one, but I've only seen the original, so I'm going with this because it's just ridiculous. And I've gone with Children of the Corn from 1984.
Okay.
So I know that for some this can be a guilty pleasure, and I kind of get that, but for me it was just, again, very dull. So I think this film actually opens okay. I think because it opens with a massacre of all the town adults done by the kids, and it's actually quite an effective scene and opens the movie really well. And then there's like no follow through. Like, that's pretty much it. So you've got, obviously Children of the Corn is about, children worshipping he who walks behind the rose, this big figure who then has them kill all the adults. It's based off the Stephen King short story, and I know that King himself does not like this adaptation. I know this is one of the adaptations that he has really spoken about, that he really hates it. It's got Linda Hamilton. So, and the other guy who's playing opposite her is another name that, like, he's a recognizable face, but even they can't save this film. I will say there are two of the kids that are like having the time of their lives hamming it up. So one of them is Isaac, who's like the little leader. He was actually played by an adult who looked very young. And then the other one is Malachi, who's his redhead second in charge. And he is the hammiest little actor I've seen, like always running around. He has this one saying, which is Outlander. So every time I hear of that TV show Outlander, I just hear Outlander in my head. Okay. And it's one of those movies where I think I don't think it quite knew what to do with itself, because it is based on a short story, and adapting short stories can be hard because you have to stretch the story out to a full movie. And I just don't know if this story had that potential, because you find a lot of the movie, there are just long stretches where like nothing is happening. The two adults are just kind of walking around the town, seeing the kids here and there. The effects, of course, it's the 80s, so they're not great. And when you finally see like the he who walks behind the rose, it's like, it's not a great revelation. It's not particularly scary, like, except for the opening scene, which is quite sinister. I mean, kids can be very creepy in horror films. I mean, The Ring, The Omen, you've got it just depends on the kids, but these particular kids I did not find really creepy. I just found more funny than anything else. So I've only seen this one once, and I only saw it recently. I think I only saw it for the first time this year or last year. It's available on YouTube for free, not surprising. And I know that its sequels get worse and worse, but I haven't seen them. So I'm going to go at number 1. Again, this one again is not as offensive as it could be. Like, it's not terrible, but it was quite boring. And I think I have a bit of a high expectation when it comes to stories based off King's works, because he is such a great storyteller and I really love his stories. So when I come across an adaptation that is not great, it's like, okay, I think it's the adaptation's fault, because I don't think the actual story would be bad, because I just have a lot of faith in King as a storyteller. So I would like to read the original short story and see what the difference is. But yeah, no, I found this one to be quite a disappointment when I finally got around to watching it. And I mean, even the title alone, it does not exactly strike fear into the hearts of people. Like, ooh, they're going to come at me with corn kernels, run! But yeah, so that is my number 11, Children of the Corn from 1984.
Yeah, good show. I can't really argue. Like, the fact that Linda Hamilton is in it, an early role for her, is the most notable thing, I think.
Yeah.
And I've only seen it once as well, and it's been a long time. It was, well, quite a few years ago, and one of the channels, it was either the horror channel or the sci-fi channel, had like a marathon where it was showing about 3 or 4 of them back to back. And of course I had to watch along, and so I can confirm that the sequels do get even worse.
Okay.
Speaking of early famous, early roles for famous I'm pretty sure Naomi Watts is in one of the sequels.
Yes, I think she is. You're right.
Like
I think
either the third or fourth one, I think. So that's something else.
And I do think that Nick Brendan is in one of the sequels as well. I'm pretty sure he's in one of them. Yeah. So just a small role. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I mean, speaking of Linda Hamilton, more positive news for her is she, of course, has just been cast in the next Stranger Things, which is very
cool
exciting.
And interesting. Yes, it is.
I mean, that's great casting, and hopefully they give her quite a big meaty role. So that's exciting. My number 11 is a big franchise movie, and definitely one of the worst sequels from the franchise. My number 11 is Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. So
nice.
Once again,
that almost ended up on my list. Almost.
Yeah, I can understand that. So yeah, this was just a really crazy movie that portrayed what Halloween should be, like the spirit of the franchise altogether. It famously has a young Paul Rudd who is completely miscast. They tried to cast him almost as an action type character, almost as like a John Connor type character. Totally miscast. And he's, as a result, he's quite boring to watch throughout the movie. It's a movie that takes ridiculous plot turns. That is just so ill-conceived, like the stuff like leaving the baby in the bathroom, that whole scene, which is so silly and like unrealistic and dumb. Not really scary at all. The characters were mostly quite boring. Like, I remember thinking the leading girl wasn't too bad, but probably nothing to write home about. But it's kind of one of those crazy movies which I can see some people getting some fun out of, but like there's just so much like silly stuff in it, and so much which makes it feel the opposite of what you want from a Halloween sequel. So the fact that they actually go so far into the supernatural and having this whole cult and that stuff, because at its best, it was always implied that Michael Myers could be a supernatural entity, but the fun of the character was the mystique, then you didn't know for sure. And but just this retconning, and that's what makes it so worse, is the retconning of this idea then for all these movies he's been controlled by these forces of evil. And that partly neuters him, really, because part of the appeal is that he is doing this on his own, and that he is just this force of nature who cannot be stopped and cannot be reasoned with. But just the fact that he's almost being according to this movie, like all these years, he's been used as a puppet and being controlled by this force is just so stupid and just so insulting to the character. And I think obviously there's other Halloween sequels we can trash, and like we mentioned, the zombie movies are just like terrible, but like outside of the zombie movies, if you just look at like the sequels to the main franchise and which is worse, I think it's definitely a toss up between this and Trick or Treat Motherfucker Halloween Resurrection. And it's only because of how silly and entertaining the end of that movie is that I might put it a little bit above this one. There's one scene in this movie which is so entertaining in a bad way, which is, of course, when they're doing that whole ritual thing in the hospital.
Yeah.
You had no idea who was doing what to who. And just and that was kind of fun, but the rest of the movie is really dull. So, yeah. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, my number.
I'm with you there. Like, I almost had this one on my list. I swapped it out for Zombies because I do actually think Zombies is just a little bit worse. But no, definitely. Yeah. I mean, when we did our reviews, neither of us enjoyed this. Like you said, Paul Rudd, horribly miscast. Also a bit of a creeper in this movie. Remember creepy Tommy Doyle, like peering in at the neighbors. Then you had like some other really nasty, like caricature, like male characters, like the dad, remember, who was like slapping his daughter around and stuff like that. Like it was really, really bad. And then of course, the movie ends with Paul Rudd beating the crap out of Michael Myers, which I'm sorry, I just don't see. So it's just, it's just not a great film. But you know what? That actually works out really well because I am kicking off the top 10 with the Halloween film. Now, as you said, as much as we love the franchise, there are some stinkers in the mix. So there are quite a few to choose from, but I am going with the most recent one because I found it so insulting. So I'm kicking off number 10 with Halloween Ends. Oh, I was so pissed off at this movie. I'm still pissed off by this movie. So if you've watched our channel, you'll know that I loved Halloween 2018. I thought that was a fantastic film. It does have some flaws, but overall, I really loved it. You'll also know that I have a soft spot for Halloween Kills, which Keith will disagree with me on, but I personally found that one fun. Halloween Ends, I wanted to kill everyone involved in this movie. First of all, I mean, we've done a review, so you guys can go and watch it, but first of all, I hated the shift. I hated the shift from Michael Myers to this new serial killer dude, Corey, whatever his name was, who was so not threatening, so not charismatic, so not anything that you could really become attached to. I don't know what they did with the character of Laurie Strode. Like, she is completely different in this. As we talked about, she's more foul. She gets like more lines that feel like they came out of the Pineapple Express than out of a Halloween film. Her niece Allison, it starts a romance with this new dude, and apparently it gets so serious that within 2 days she's willing to run off with him. And then, of course, the biggest insult in this movie, what it does to Michael Myers. The way it turns him from this formidable, imposing monster to like this pitiful old man who's like fighting some teenager in a sewer and losing. Like, I think I've mentioned this, but I like literally laughed out loud at that part. I think I was pissing off people in the cinema, but I could not get over how ridiculous it was. And then that final showdown, if you can even call it a showdown, between Laurie and Michael was just so underwhelming. And I mean, after Halloween Kills, which even though I enjoy it, I can still admit that it's not a great film and it's definitely got some issues, but I didn't expect the franchise to sink so low as to Halloween Ends. And I'm actually going to be revisiting the whole trilogy for October for my channel, and I'm going to rewatch all three and do an analysis. But I'm like really did I tell you I bought it recently because I'm a sucker and I have to own complete series. So I found a buy two get one free deal at my local DVD store. So I was like, cool, I can get it for free. But yeah, no, it was awful, and I didn't find anything to like about this film. Like, at least with Halloween Kills, kills. There were quite a few kill scenes that I liked. I liked the mob scene. I liked certain things. And I know you don't 100% agree with me on this, but for me, when I was watching the first two movies, I felt that they were definitely building up this kind of mythology around Michael and Laurie, which was going to end up being a showdown between the two of them and maybe a taking you with me kind of deal. Like, they were very much implying that they were tied together. And then the third movie just threw all of that out the window, and I don't even know what they were trying to do with it. So, yeah, I'll stop there because I could literally rant for hours about how much I hate this movie and how insulting it is to the rest of the franchise. But while there are probably other movies in the franchise that might technically be worse films, I don't like this one because of what it did to Michael Myers, to Laurie Strode, and basically to the whole mythology of the movies. And I really didn't like that they suddenly introduced this new character, this new killer, in the third installment of the movie. Like, maybe if they'd introduced him in number 2, it might have flowed better, but it didn't work for me. So that's kicking off my top 10 or worst 10 list. Number 10, Halloween Ends.
Yeah, good pick. I can understand it. Like, I won't really add anything because we did a long, in-depth chat on it, which you can find on the channel. I'll probably link it. And oh boy, yeah, having seen him destroy the Halloween franchise, we now get to look forward to him destroying The Exorcist as well.
I know.
That is fast approaching. In fact, I think today they've announced and they've bumped up the release date, so it's actually early October now.
Oh, okay.
Which may be a good thing. At least we get it over a bit sooner. But I am expecting that to be terrible as well. I'm kicking off my top 10 with something a bit different, and this was a recent watch. And yeah, don't adjust your volumes, but the title of the movie is...
Oh, you talked about this, yes.
So you've sort of know a little bit. What a lame-ass movie this is. I mean, it's going for like a spoof on Friday the 13th, except it's not really. It's only really the title that's a spoof. When you watch the actual movie, like, it does none of the things that movie does, so it's not really playing on the tropes or making fun of that. The setup is, and you get this family who move into a new house, and it's like meant to be a weird looking creepy house, and you have these characters, or it might just be one character, I can't remember, but like a monster style family who are kind of in the background, and they're kind of, I think they're sort of doing it from the peanut gallery type characters, but they're kind of the ones advising, this is a creepy neighborhood, you shouldn't really go in. So that's the setup for the movie, and then as things play out, you get certain horror things, but the idea is that it's an airplane style spoof comedy, and and that's what it comes down to, is the jokes are just so lame. It's like one of the weakest comedies I've probably ever seen. It's kind of an insult, and there's pretty much no tie-ins to Friday the 13th apart from the title, and they just do this random other movie. But at the end of the day, the humour is what it's going to come down to, and the humour are just so lame. It's such a pale imitation when you think about classic spoofs like Aeroplane or the Naked Gun movies, and this is just so bad compared to those. Like, the characters are just so dull to watch. I know the acting isn't that important in this sort of thing, but there's no real charisma.
You still want some believability.
The jokes are just so very lame and really like cliched and old, and it just does nothing with the premise, and at the end of the day, like, occasionally I might have chuckled a bit, and that's about it, and that's not good enough for what is meant to be a comedy, and what is meant to be, you're hoping something which is going to have fun with the ideas of horror and send them up, and that's what you want, and that's not what you get. It's one of the lamest movies I've ever seen, maybe. Considering what it's purporting to be. And the other thing, like, the one interesting footnote of the movie, I'll say, is that weirdly the setting is called Elm Street, But
Oh.
this is actually pre-Nightmare on Elm Street, the original movie.
Oh, okay.
Because this
That's
movie,
cool.
I think it's 81, so that's a few years before the first Nightmare. So that's a weird thing. I mean, I sort of like to imagine maybe Wes Craven nicked it off this movie, because that would be quite funny, but
Yeah.
I kind of doubt he even saw this movie, so that makes I guess maybe they just thought Elm Street was a scary sounding thing, but I don't recommend the movie. It's a real slog. So that's
it does sound pretty bad.
My top 10.
I think the thing with horror comedies is they really are hit or miss. Like you have to find just that right brand of humor to marry with the horror so that it works really well. And sometimes it just doesn't. And it's actually kind of cool that you're talking about a bad horror comedy, because my number 9 is also another horror comedy that just, in my opinion, did not work. It's another sequel film, came out in, where are we looking at? 2004, and that is Seed of Chucky. Oh dear.
Good choice.
So the Chucky films, again, they go up and down in tone. You know, the first Child's Play is really good. The number 2 and 3 start to get a bit repetitive. Bride of Chucky was fantastic. I love Bride of Chucky, but then came Seed of Chucky. So this one focuses on Glenn, voiced by Dominic, what's his face from Lord of the Rings. One of the Hobbits voices this guy, and you know it's all about like.
Is it the one out of Lost as well?
No, it must be the other one. So not Dominic, Billy, the one who plays Pippin. It's him, yeah. And so this one I saw in the mid 2000s, pretty much when it first came out, and it's just, it misses the comedy. I think it leans too much into the comedy and doesn't go enough for the horror. Glenn is not a great central character. He doesn't have that kind of charisma and funny humor and the edge that both Chucky and Tiffany have. And of course, Chucky and Tiffany are both, you know, featured in this, but this is very much about Glenn trying to discover who he is and why his parents kill. And I will say one fun thing about this movie is it does have Jennifer Tilly playing Jennifer Tilly, which is fun to watch. And Tiffany has decided that she wants to take Jennifer Tilly's body. So it's a kind of a whole meta thing there that they're trying to do. But yeah, this movie was just, I just remember it being really lame is like the best way I can describe it, especially for a Chucky film. I think the fact that Chucky himself was not the focus was a big mistake, because like I said, Glenn is not really an interesting character, especially because they don't seem to quite know what to do with him. Now, if I remember correctly, because this film is in the mid 2000s, it is quite homophobic and transphobic and a million other things that, you know, do not age well from the mid 2000s. And just one of those ones where the comedy just did not marry well with the horror, which is a pity, because in Chucky, you can really get a good marriage of those two things. Like I said, Bride of Chucky is a great example, you know, but everything that they did right in that film, they did wrong in this film. And it just ended up, for me, just being a really bad experience. And unfortunately, this was one of the earliest Chucky films I saw. Like, this was the second, I saw the original and then I saw this. So it kind of tainted my view off the Child's Play franchise for a long time. I do think that more recent entries from a Child's Play franchise have gone down better, but this one I think was just terrible. I think they did bring it into the TV show though. I think Glenn did come up in the TV show and they mentioned like Chucky having like a non-binary kid or something like that. So they're at least trying to handle that a little bit better. But I only saw this film once and that was enough. I can still remember how bad it was and how much I disliked it. Maybe if I rewatched it now, I might find that it's a bit more clever, but I really don't think it is. I think the best thing to do is just watch Bride of Chucky and completely ignore this one. But that's my number 9, good old Seed of Chucky.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think that was another thing for me at the time, because I've only seen this once, which was in cinemas, and after how good Bride of Chucky was, and the anticipation, because like they had that really fun cliffhanger with like revealed then there's gonna be like a baby, and it kind of one of those endings where it wouldn't have mattered if there wasn't another movie, because it could just be one of those fun like endings playing with you. But it definitely sets up then. Yeah, they could do something with that for another movie, and also because there was quite a large gap between those two movies coming out.
There
as
was, yeah.
well. So I think my anticipation was there, and coming off the back of Pride, I thought, yeah, I'm looking forward to this. And when I went, I was just so disappointed.
Yeah.
And luckily, they managed to turn the franchise around
Yes,
again and
they
do
did.
some good stuff with the later movies. But definitely a low point in the franchise. I think it's out of that and Child's Play 3 for the worst movie.
Yeah, I think so.
But I disagree with you on 2. Actually, I really enjoy 2, the second
Oh,
Child's
okay,
Play.
fair enough. I haven't watched it in a while, so I might have to revisit it.
Yeah, I think it's a rare sequel where I might say it's even better than the original. And
Okay.
yeah, we'll definitely a franchise we'll do anyway.
Yes.
And I know at some point there's a 3rd season of the show.
Oh,
It might even be this year. I'm not sure. I saw something about it. My number 9, it's our first crossover of the list. And I've also gone, but much higher, with the Prom Night remake.
Nice.
I won't say much because I'll just be saying what you've said, but it's a really dull, very boring movie with really paper-thin characters.
Yeah.
Who are, like you said, extremely annoying, very generic. Yeah, it has none of the charm of the original, none of the wit, because there is some good humour in the original, and it's a decent enough horror movie, the original. I think probably for the time as well, it was reasonably original to do that sort of format. Like, it's been done to death since, but at the time it probably was quite original to set it at a prom and do that kind of, and I quite enjoyed the murder mystery aspect of that.
I do too.
Movie.
Yes, me too.
But like you said, this does turn it into more of a, it feels more like a TV style, like generic crime style show, and like it turns into the wrong kind of like murder mystery type thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, very forgettable cast apart from Brittany Snow, who isn't best served in the movie. So
no.
Yeah, I've gone with Prom Night, the remake, for my number 9.
Nice. Well, I like that we have at least one crossover. We'll see if we have any more, but that's cool that we've at least got one in common. Alrighty. So my number 8 is, again, part of another franchise. We're seeing a pattern here. And again, another early 2000s film. This was just really not a good time for horror, at least in my opinion. So I have gone to the Friday the 13th series, and I have gone with Jason X from 2001.
Okay.
So I don't know who's taking Jason Voorhees into space. That seems like a really dumb idea. But I had to. So I first saw this when I was about 17, and I don't think I've watched it again since. I think it was like one of the first Jason movies I saw. So it's not a good way to be introduced to the character. But I went and just to jog my memory, because I'm like, who's taking Jason? Like I said, who's taking Jason into space? That is just really dumb. No, it turns out that the movie opens in the present, and Jason ends up in some weird place where he gets cryogenically frozen. And then, like, 400 years into the future, he's on like some spaceship or whatever, and then he gets unfrozen up in space, and chaos ensues on a spaceship. Now, Kane Hodder is in fine form. You know, he is obviously one of the best Jasons and the guy who's played Jason the most. But the film is really crap. If I remember correctly, really bad characters. Again, not that the Friday the 13th movies are known for great characters. I mean, they've always kind of had asshole victims, but these ones in particular, I don't think were really that great. Like I said, the premise itself is really, really weird. Again, like, I think they're just kind of looking, I think at this point in the franchise, they're like, what can we do that's different? What can we do that takes him away from Crystal Lake? But it's like, to send him into space, that's really odd. And if I remember correctly, it's just one of those movies that just moves really slowly. I mean, you only have this one setting, which is a spaceship. And I mean, you'd think that you could do some interesting stuff with it, but I'm pretty sure they don't. And they end up like distracting him with like some hologram of like Camp Crystal Lake at the end of it, and like that's how they defeat him. But it's futuristic and it's weird, and Jason doesn't really belong in science fiction. You know, it's not a good marriage. I don't think it blends well, and it was just a really boring. Again, we're going for a boring film with a killer who's actually quite a fun killer. You know, people love Jason. I mean, the Friday the 13th movie, one of the most successful horror franchises of all time, but this was just a really bad entry. I think a lot of the entries for these franchises in the early 2000s were just not great. I don't know if they were running out of steam or running out of ideas. Apparently they were running out of ideas. He also has a different mask in this one, which is like, you know, it's like a
that looks
futuristic,
so
like
stupid.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's just really dumb. So, like, everything about this movie, I mean, it's got 19% on Rotten Tomatoes. So that should tell you right there how the quality of writing. So the Friday the 13th franchise is not one of my favorites. I personally have never been a massive Jason fan. He's just not, you know, my style of killer. But I can appreciate him for what it is. And I think the original movie is not too bad. And Tom Savini's special effects are quite fun. But yeah, no, this is a really bad entry. Another entry that kind of drags the franchise down and is best left forgotten about. So that's my number 8. Good old Jason in Space, Jason X.
Yeah, well, this is one I've not seen, but I do hear really bad things, and it says something because a lot of these franchises, when they have a sequel and they go into space, like, fans really seem to enjoy them. I think just because it's something different and it's kind of just so different and so silly, they actually quite enjoy it. But yeah, this sounds like the bad example of that, where it is what were they thinking? And it's the one that's kind of a blast and so bad it's good is the Jason Takes Manhattan, which is another one I need to get to. But okay, there you go. From what I've heard, and I've not seen it, I definitely can't fault that pick from what I've heard. Now, my number 8 is a pick that you might fault. Probably not as much as Scream 3, but I could see maybe you disagreeing on this one. My number 8 is I Still Know What You Did Last Summer.
Oh, really?
Yes, really.
Okay.
Now, it might be quite high. I mean, some of the orders are interchangeable, but now I know in the past you've said you prefer this to the first movie, and
just because it has more fun, at least in my opinion. It takes itself less seriously than the first movie does.
Well, yeah, which I can understand. So I think that is the defense for it in a way, because I definitely agree that first movie takes itself too seriously and suffers as a result. So this is the one on the Caribbean island. It randomly has Jack Black in for some reason.
I was going to mention it's got Jack Black in it.
It has the terrible casting of Brandy, who really was never going to have an acting career. I know she had her own sitcom. That's like the other thing.
Sure, it was not great.
No, I got the impression it wasn't. But she's really bad. I think once again it highlights Jennifer
Love Hewitt.
Yeah, I almost said Jennifer Jason Leigh, but Jennifer Love Hewitt. It really highlights, and she isn't a very convincing leading lady.
No, not in these ones. No.
And the cast are pretty bad and really annoying characters. It's a very stupid movie, a really brain dead movie, and we talked about, I think, in the past, like the whole thing about the radio contest, and the twist is then they get the capital of Brazil wrong for the question, and that's the whole thing. So that's kind of something I can have a chuckle with. I'm not really sure if the filmmakers did that deliberately as a gag, or if it's just one of these stupid plot sort of holes which they didn't really pick up on. But whatever, it's something, I guess. But yeah, it's just a very boring, generic movie. Like, them chasing around this island is not very interesting to watch. That they don't make the most of the location. Sometimes horrors in one location can be really well done. Again, it might just be a problem of I was talking about earlier with another movie where maybe the location is just a bit too pretty, and I think that's part of the problem with some horrors from this era, and the way they make them is they make them a bit too pretty, and they're full of like pretty people, and at times they feel a bit too much like you're watching like a TV show, like a teen TV show. So maybe the location was part of the problem with this, but I can see what you're saying. I can see how it takes itself less seriously than the first one, so it's got that in its favor at least. But yeah, it's a really brain dead movie, and like the cast was obviously a bit better in the first one, so that's something which makes that definitely a better movie. But it's probably a taste thing. Like, I think they're both bad movies, but I just see this one as being even worse than the first one. So that's my number 8 anyway. I still know what you did last summer.
Well, similarly to An American Werewolf in Paris, I can't actually disagree with anything that you're saying, because you're right. It is a stupid movie. Jack Black is randomly there for no reason. The radio contest, Brandy, everything. But for me, it is a bit of a guilty pleasure, just because I love the first one, even though I agree that it's not the greatest film. I have a soft spot for the first one. And so because this one is the sequel and it doesn't take itself as seriously and they have a bit of fun with it, like, I do love that they repeat the "what are you waiting for" line, and stuff like that. So, it's again, I don't disagree. Like when it comes to Scream 3, we're definitely in disagreement on the quality. But with these ones, I can agree that they're bad quality, but I still just kind of really like them. They're just a guilty pleasure. And sometimes you got to have that. Sometimes you've just got to watch a nice brain dead, stupid movie about a bunch of pretty people running around in the Bahamas. Sometimes it works. But no, I can't fault you for putting that on the list, because it really isn't a great movie. And I mean, the first one's not that well made either. I just have a soft spot for both of them because of my love of late 90s horror. So, yeah, I'm with you.
And have you seen the third one?
I have.
I'll always know
what you did last summer. That one almost made my list, because that one is so bad. Oh, that one's got nothing to do with the first two. Completely new cast, completely new premise, characters you don't give two shits about. Oh my God, no, really, really bad. And I think the only reason I watched it was because one of the main characters was in the Animorphs TV series, which I loved as a kid. And so I watched it for her. And I was like, oh, honey, even you are not worth watching this movie for. So no, it was very bad.
How is the Animorphs TV series?
Animorphs? Did you ever read the Animorphs books?
I don't think so.
Okay, no, another time we're going to have a talk about that, because they are awesome. But that's for another time. Alrighty. Okay. So my number 7, I know that you're going to disagree with, because this is a movie that we have reviewed together that you liked and I did not like. So for my number 7, I've gone with Christmas Evil. So we do have a review of this one up. Keith made me watch this during the Christmas season last year, and it just didn't take for me. So this
Christmas, enjoyed a classic slasher. That's what we did last Christmas.
No. It was not. It was. So I do think Christmas is it's a good time to set horror films around, but not this one. Again, this had that weird scene at the beginning of like the kid seeing like his mum having sex with Santa Claus, and apparently that traumatized him for life, and then he goes on a killing spree when he's older, and it had some of those really weird scenes. There was that one that happened in public, and it was like really odd, and like everyone standing around watching the murder happen. You had that really creepy scene where he gets like mistaken for like an actual Santa Claus, and they like bring him into the party and he's like being all shifty. And yeah, for me, the film just didn't work. I found it slow. I found it a bit uninvolved. Again, I think it comes down to taste. And yeah, this one was just not up my alley. I don't even remember it that well. I just remember like when Steve and I were watching it, I was like, I'm going to kill Keith for making me watch another bad movie. But yeah, look, go and watch our review, because we definitely go into it more there. But I did not really enjoy this film. And again, it might just be my slight aversion to 80s. Like, I don't love a lot of films that came out in the 80s. But yeah, this one was just not up my alley. So that's my number 7. You're right.
Because I'm gonna...
Oh no.
I've got the sticker, the Christmas Evil sticker. I'll stick it on your face for not liking.
No. Oh dear. Well, I knew you were going to contend that one, but that's my
got
number
it.
7.
I got it for free, to be fair. Someone sent me
Nice.
it, but yeah, I'm very proud of having that. Yeah, it's a cult gem, Rachel. You don't know what you're talking about. It's a lot of fun, with one of the greatest cinematic endings of all time, without doubt.
Oh no.
The van as
The
a
van.
slap, almost, yeah, that is just beautiful.
Oh dear.
I love the fact you can read that ending as being in his head potentially as well.
That's true.
I absolutely love that. But it's a fun movie. Go and check it out. Seasons beatings to everyone. Enjoy that one. Feeling I don't quite have enough movies. I think I might have done that thing of fucking hell. Okay, well I was gonna have one, and for the sake of time, I'll just have to slot that into one of these slots of 7. It's a movie I'm going to subject Rachel to in October. It's a movie called. It's along similar lines to Camp Blood that I mentioned earlier. It's a movie called Axem. Axem.
Okay,
Great
great.
title,
That sounds.
at least, but yeah, this is a total vanity project by the guy who made it, and you can really see that when you watch the movie. But it is such a rip-off of Friday the 13th. It is crazy.
Oh.
And the killer in this is so lame, and the setup is like that, just a generic, like these random characters all assemble for the weekend to go to this house, and it turns out then there's like, I can't remember if it has to be an axe because of the title, but axe with maniac. And when you see the killer, he is just so lame and unthreatening. And again, it's one of those B-grade movie. In fact, it makes Camp Blood even seems, quite sort of like there's a little bit of budget to that one. And it's one of those movies you can tell it's the actor and or the director, and he's got a bunch of his friends, and just the editing and how slow everything is. But I will say this definitely, which is why I regret having to slot it in here, but it's definitely a so bad it's good movie, more than Camp Blood. I would say I recommend it on that scale more than Camp Blood, but on many levels it's an even worse movie than Camp Blood. There is just so cheesy, so many dumb things in the movie that it's a whole movie of what feels like outtakes, really.
God!
And it has this thing where apparently it's based on a true story, so that's the thing that they tried to sell the movie on. But it's just such a badly directed, edited and acted movie with the least imposing villain you could imagine. And there's just ridiculous stuff. Like at one point, the lead character, there's a point where he's meant to be really scared, and for some reason his glasses flap up and down, and there's just a close up of that.
Awesome.
What the fuck? But I think I watched this last Halloween or something on the stream, and I've got to say it was one of those I had quite a bit of fun with because it was just so cheesy and bad. But we're gonna watch it for
something
this
to look forward to.
It's something to look forward to, and it's from the early 90s, and it's a movie I stumbled upon because for those of you who follow my channel, you'll know that I've been doing the box office from 92 when I covered that, and it's one of those movies, obviously it got nowhere near the box office, but it's one that I noticed was one which was released, and I thought, what the fuck is this? And that's how I discovered it. So I've got to say, as bad as it is, it's a bit of a so bad they're good style gem. So look forward to more of that in October. That's
Well,
accent. My number.
Well, from your description, I'm actually now kind of looking forward to watching it because I do love a So Bad It's Good horror movie. So we'll see how it goes. That being said, you and I have different opinions on what's So Bad It's Good. So we will see how we go when we get to that one. But very cool. Alrighty. So my number 6 is another Christmas movie. Again, we're getting some themes. So this is, well, you're gonna be surprised when I say the title, but then wait for the year. So my number 6 is Black Christmas, 2019. Oh, so as we all know, I love the original Black Christmas. Keith enjoys it too. We've done a review of it. It's a great film. It's, you know, one of the pioneers in slasher films, and I love Olivia Hussey, who's in the lead. There was a remake done in 2006. Now that remake is not great either, but that one at least tries to follow the original storyline, has the same setting of the sorority house, and it's got some actresses I like Michelle Trachtenberg, Lacey Chabert, Katie Castee. So it's got a few things I like. Black Christmas 2019 is just extreme left social justice crap wrapped up in a horror movie. It literally has scenes where the girls will stand around and go on these massive diatribes about how evil men are and how unsafe everything is. Now, it is once again set at a sorority house, and that's pretty much the only thing it has in common with the original, because the killer ends up being completely different. It doesn't have that point of view shot type thing. It doesn't have the girls being stalked through the house. It's more a commentary on rape culture and, you know, dating culture and everything like that. But it was just such a slog to get through, because it felt like every 5 minutes some woman was turning around and giving some big diatribe on the evils of men and how women aren't safe. And I'm pretty sure the killer ends up being like a frat boy who's like taking advantage of like the sorority girls when they get drunk and stuff. Like, I don't mind a horror film using social justice themes. There are horror films out there that can do that very well. And I mean, that's been around since the 60s when you look at like Day of the Dead, you know, with George Romero and stuff like that. Like, I have no issue with that. But what I don't like is when it's done in such a obtuse way, you know, where it's basically coming out and just smacking its audience in the face with it over and over and over again. And that is what this film does. And outside of that, it's not even a very good film. You know, there's not a lot of tension. There's not a lot of horror. The lead actress is her last name is Poots. Is it Emily Poots or something like that? I think Imogen. Imogen
who I
Poots.
quite like, actually.
Yeah, I don't mind her, but she wasn't great in this. None of the supporting characters were great. All of the male characters in this movie are just assholes. And I wasn't expecting greatness from it. It obviously was never going to live up to the original. And the 2006 one is actually pretty crap too, but at least I have fun when I watch that one because it is just a mindless slasher. Whereas this was just one of the most tedious things to get through. And I really, again, I don't like the fact that, I know it's a remake, not a sequel, but it's associated with a movie that I consider to be a really good movie and a really effective horror movie, and, you know, one of the pioneers, like I said, in slasher films. So the fact that this movie is now connected to that, and that there will be a generation that this will be their introduction to Black Christmas as opposed to the 70s one, it's like, no, that doesn't sit well with me. So I really did not like this film. I didn't like it as a horror film, but I just didn't like it as a film, full stop, because it was just too over the top for me. So that's my number 6, Black Christmas from 2019.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting pick. Like, I'm not a fan of it. I think I might like it a bit more than you. I think just because I appreciate that they did try stuff, like, even though it didn't quite come off. And yeah, it was a really unsatisfying horror movie for me. It's debatable whether it's worse than 2006, because that was pretty bad. But
yeah, but for me, that one falls into So Bad It's Good, so I can have fun with it. And like I said, it's got a lot of cast members that I like, the 2006 one, and that can make up for a lot for me if it has cast members that I like. I think I liked almost the entire cast of that movie, so yeah, I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've definitely heard someone else online with a similar complaint with this one. Then it is very preachy and like kind of I'm glad you said extreme left, so it's the sort of thing that maybe gives genuine left people a bad name. But
because I am left leaning. I'm left leaning, and I definitely like the things that they had in the movie, definitely important issues, but it's just the way they just were so obtuse with it, and the way they just kept smacking the audience in the face with it, to the point that it felt like it was overtaking the horror. So it just didn't work for me.
Stand out so much to me than they were doing that, because I'm maybe coming from the point of view of being a male. Possibly, I don't know. Maybe it just stood out more to you as a female because, like, to you in a way, it's letting down the side a bit with that sort of approach to that kind of issue. Like movie, like it's not one which I considered to have on my list because I don't see it as being that bad, but I can understand your reasonings for having it on here. My number 6, and it's funny because I've just noticed another movie which I meant to put on the list, which I didn't. What a shambles this is. I'll have to have it as an honourable mention now. Okay, so my number 6, which complements I Still Know What You Did Last Summer a little bit as well. My number 6 is a movie called Soul Survivors from 2000.
Yes, I know Soul Survivors.
Right. Yeah, I watched it for the first time quite recently. What a dull movie this is, full of really vapid characters. Obviously, for us, it's annoying that Eliza Dushku's in it. She should have been the lead of the movie. She's wasted in the role that she's in. The lead in comparison was a really dull character. And the characters in general are just people you don't give a shit about in this movie. And it feels almost like they're going for the goth version of Dawson's Creek. That's what a lot of this bit was like. And the plot is stupid, it's not scary, and the drama is just so stupid and forced. It's the sort of drama that you don't need in this sort of movie, in a horror movie. Like, it's really bad and really a chore to get through. It has some really crappy early 2000s tropes which haven't aged very well. The plot is just really dumb, just like really dumb to watch these characters and their dramas and how easily they get ticked off with each other. And one of the funny things, there's this really random shower scene in the movie, and what's funny about it is two girls are getting showered, and it's because they've just done painting and they've got like paint on them. But what's weird is it's not going the way you think, because they actually leave their clothes on to have a shower, and I'm assuming it's because they felt they couldn't get away with it. But it's just this rant. It's like, well, not that I necessarily want to see them like nude or anything, but it's like, why are you even showing this? But it's just this weird sort of thing where they apparently can't show them naked in the shower, but then this whole thing is unnatural because if they're having a shower, that they would be undressed.
That's odd.
Yeah, it's another weird thing. And the other thing this movie did for me is it made me realise Wes Bentley is a really crap actor, because he's terrible in this. And I almost feel like him in American Beauty was like a fluke, because that's the one role where I think he's actually quite good. Maybe just because they nailed the casting, but he's a terrible actor in this. He's got no charisma. He's very boring. He's very wooden and monotone, and I don't think I've seen him in that much besides anyway, but like I can't, apart from American Beauty, I can't think of anything else of note he's been in where you could say this actor looks like a promising actor. And he's terrible in this. Just, as I said, no charisma, and even as someone who's maybe meant to be threatening at time, he has no real threat to him. So that's something that stands out. But a classic example of a really bad early 2000s movie, which probably if I watched it at the time I would have thought, yeah, this is a bad movie. But watching it all these years later, I think it stands out even more because it hasn't aged very well. So that's Soul Survivors.
Yeah, because I haven't seen it all, but I've seen enough of it. And because I remember I started to watch it ages ago because it very misleadingly, the cover makes it look like Eliza Dushku is the main character because she's front and center on the cover. So I remember picking it up, and then when I realized she wasn't the main character and that the movie was actually kind of lame, I stopped watching. But no, that was definitely one of the worst slashes to come out of the early 2000s. And yeah, just really bad advertising. Because yeah, if you pick up the DVD couple, Eliza's like front Eliza's like front and center, but she's not really in it. And she's basically just playing a less nuanced version of Faith in this movie. Like her character is like gives her nothing to work with. So you can definitely get on board with that one. All right, so we're into top 5 now. So my number 5 is another remake, and another remake that came out within the last couple of years that I was so very, very unimpressed with, especially because the original is a freaking classic, and that is Texas Chainsaw Massacre that came out last year. This was the anticipated sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They were bringing back the actress, or they were bringing back the character of Sally Hardesty, and we were all like really excited. And then it turned out to be just one of the lamest movies ever. Now, I know the Texas Chainsaw sequels are not always great. We end up with the one all the way with Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger. But I think with this one, okay, first of all, it wasn't scary. Like, nothing about this film was scary. And the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I find so scary and so disturbing that I've actually only seen it like once or twice. I can't actually watch it because it is such an intense experience. I think this one suffers a bit from what you were talking about with 2000s movies, is that it looks too pretty, especially for a Texas Chainsaw film. Like, Texas Chainsaw films, they're supposed to be dirty. They're supposed to look like these people are living these feral lives. Like, they really are a group of, like, inbred degenerates just living out in the middle of nowhere. Whereas this one being set in that weird ghost town, and then them having that whole hoo-ha with like, we own this place, we bought this place, no you didn't. Leatherface's appearance is just really meh. Like, there's that implication that like someone's like keeping him like as a pet almost in like their house, and then he gets loose. That scene on the bus where like everyone's all like, you're cancelled, bro. It's like, really? What is this? Why are we canceling Leatherface? It is just so weird. And Sally Hardesty as a character was completely wasted. I mean, she comes out, she fires off a few shots at Leatherface, and then she dies. It wasn't like when you bring like Laurie Strode back or anything like that. It was completely wasted. And then I thought the ending was really lame too. So just everything about this movie really disappointed me. And again, I feel like, as I've said with quite a few of these, it is made even worse by the fact that it is associated with a movie that is so amazing. Texas Chainsaw is staple for any horror fan. Just such a great film, such an intense experience that they had making that film, and it came together. So, I mean, you watch Texas Chainsaw, and you can almost feel the atmosphere of that movie coming through your TV screen. You can feel the heat. You can almost smell the house. Everything about it is so visceral, and this was just so clean and sanitized and just not at all good. And again, not scary. Leatherface is, I think, one of the most terrifying villains. I mean, there's a reason I can't watch the original that often, because he is so scary. And this one just did nothing for me. I was so disappointed by this remake. So I'm going with number 5. Yeah, and again, because it's associated with the original, I think that's why it's so high. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that came out last year and was just one of the biggest disappointments.
Okay. Well, I agree with most of that. I don't feel as strongly as you, though. Like, I agree it's a bad movie, but I don't feel that strongly. That
fair enough.
Because there are some things in it I liked, and overall, I just think there are much worse horror movies. So, yeah. 5. Back to our good pal Rob Zombie. My number 5 is The Devil's Rejects.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
If you want a good snapshot of what this guy does and why his films are so horrible to sit through, horrible in a bad way, I should point out, and so disgusting to watch, and why his characters are all trailer park cliches, and it's just full of really cheap button pushing sort of like nasty hillbilly stereotypes, and every character is the same. And then this movie kind of sums it up. I'm not sure if it's the first that has his wife, but I know she does feature prominently, and once again, that's really creepy and unsettling that he keeps casting his wife. And I know randomly DDP shows up in this, and he's a wrestler. Like,
okay.
This page to give in his first, and that was a moment. It's like, okay. And I know Rob Zombie has done like music that has featured in wrestling, so I guess that's maybe the connection there. But it's like, yeah, what the fuck is DDP doing in this? And yeah, it was just crap. It was just like gross crap, and just very boring to watch. The characters didn't interest me at all. I didn't find it as shocking or like grotesque in a horror sense in the way it was aiming for, and it's scary that he's done worse, but this is obviously up there. Like, I think this is, because I remember ages ago seeing his first movie, House of a Thousand Corpses.
I can't.
No, okay. No. Well, at the time, and it might have been me in my naive youth, and also I think because it's his first movie, so it's before we'd really been like desensitized maybe a bit. But like at the time, I didn't actually mind that one, but I've only seen it once, which was ages ago. But yeah, that his movies have really transpired since then, and probably got worse, if anything. If you see that as a starting point, really, his movies have only got worse since then, for the most part. And yeah, I think Devil's Rejects is right up there, because there's very little merit, if there is any at all. So yeah, terrible movie. A good example of why I don't like Zombie as a director, and why I don't think he should direct. He should stick to the music thing, which if you like that stuff, he's perfectly fine at doing that stuff, but I don't think he ever should have got in the film business. So
no.
Devil's Rejects.
Yeah, good pick. I haven't actually seen that one, or at least not all of it. But Zombie is he's just I don't like his style. And I've seen House of a Thousand Corpses once. Oh my god, it was awful. But so Sherry Moon Zombie is in that one, and then they took the Firefly gang from that one and put them in the Devil's Rejects. And so because apparently they were really popular, although God knows why. I have this issue with the way Zombie films his wife. Because he films her through the male gaze, and it's like, dude, that's your wife. Why are you filming her that way? It's really disturbing. I remember noticing that in Halloween, where she's playing a stripper, and then I noticed it in House of a Thousand Corpses as well. And then there was another one that she was in, and I'm like, who films their wife like this? Like, this is really bad. So yeah, I had a feeling that we'd both have at least one zombie film on our list, because neither of us are a massive fan of him. So can definitely get on board with having that one and having it this high as well. I don't like him as a director either. I can appreciate that he really does love the horror genre. Like, he does have a passion for it, and I can always appreciate that. But that doesn't necessarily, just because you have a passion for something doesn't necessarily mean that you can translate it into actual skills. And I'm with you. I don't think he is the best director. He's just not. And he goes way too much for shock. And the shock, like you said, it's not even that shocking. It just feels too gratuitous. It doesn't even really get the effect that you want it to. So you're right. Just stick to music, man. Stick to music and going to see horror films. Doesn't mean you have to make them. So yeah. All right. So at my number 4, I'm going to a franchise that you have mentioned that we both love so much. And I had so many to pick from with this franchise. So it took me a while to figure out which one I was going to go with. But I have gone with Wrong Turn number 5, because that is the one I couldn't even finish watching.
Okay.
So look, as we've talked about, the Wrong Turn films after the first one, they just get they're just all over the place, and the majority of them are very, very bad. So this is Bloodlines. This one is the one I think that's set at like the music festival. Yes, they're going to the Mountain Man Music Festival, and it's a gang of kids. And this one has that one death that you did actually send me a little video of, the lawnmower
which
death.
is very entertaining.
Very entertaining. But again, I mean, there's not much to say about these films other than after the first one, they basically just rely on the shock of like this particular gang and like trying to make the kills look as disgusting as possible. And so, I mean, I almost put the one that was set in that weird hotel where it turns out that one of them is like I almost went with that one.
6, I think.
Yes, and I went with 5 just because like I couldn't finish 5. I managed to sit through all of the others, but I remember 5 I ended up turning off. So I think you pretty much covered it with yours, because all of these films, they're not very different. They basically have the same rinse and repeat. Horrible characters, villains you don't really get behind, who are also mildly insulting, because we really need to get away from this whole inbreeding, less intelligence equals evil kind of shtick that we put in horror films. And I mean, I'd probably give most of the others an honorable mention, because it was hard to figure out which one to put on this list. But yes, like I said, I went with Wrong Turn 5 because I couldn't even get through it. It's just one of those franchises that I don't understand how they had so many movies made when they are all, except for the first one, so bad. So go and watch our review for them if you want more details, guys. We don't really need to go more into that here, but that's my number 4, Wrong Turn 5.
Yeah, it's a good pick. Like, I think that one, compared to some, gets a little bit of a bump for me, just because some of the kills are quite fun. But yeah, I can't really complain with you having it. It's a really terrible movie. Weird franchise where it's bookended by 2 movies that are at least decent and have a little bit more of a budget. And
yes.
Number 7, which was sort of a reboot type thing, and so that was better, and like the first one was decent, but all the stuff in
all the ones in between, just
it's just hilarious that we got to number 4 and the standards were so low. Then we actually said, maybe this is, for this franchise, a half decent sequel. Number 4 is a really cheap, generic Candyman ripoff. And it's a movie called The Bye-Bye Man.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen this one?
I have. Oh.
Yeah. Terrible. So lame, so boring, such a cheap knockoff of the Candyman. And one of the things that sums up how stupid this movie is the fact that there's a scene where it's the cliched scene of them looking up the legend on a computer, and they look it up, they put Bye Bye Man into the search engine, and nothing comes up. So that scene is so dumb. The fact that we're meant to buy that if you put Bye Bye Man into a search engine, you would get no results.
Nothing.
Whatever. But yeah, this is terrible. This is just an example of a really dull, generic horror movie that is so cliched, such a rip-off of Candyman and various other movies, really, and it's just such a lame version of this. Nothing entertaining about it, nothing scary, bad acting, annoying characters, all the rest of it. Yeah. And this sort of movie where it is low budget, but it has a little bit of a budget compared to some other movies on the list. So the fact it is as bad as it is even more unforgivable. But yeah, this is when it just comes to the way sometimes Hollywood churn out generic horrors like this. This is a prime example of this. So this is why it's so high on my list, because really I got nothing out of it, really.
Actually, I'd forgotten about that film until you just mentioned it, because I probably would have put it on my list too, because I was the same. I watched this and I was like, okay, first of all, you're ripping off my main man, Tony Todd. Okay, don't be doing that. And second, I remember thinking, like, if I remember correctly, they don't actually give you a proper explanation in the film. Like, they don't actually fully explain what the Bye Bye Man is and like why the legend exists. It's just like, you say it and he turns up and then like that's it. And yeah, that was a really bad movie. So I'm definitely on board with that. And I wish that I'd I'd remembered it because I would have put it on my list because I was so disappointed by that film, and it was just, yeah, it was really lame. So that's a great choice. All right, so my number 3 is a little movie from the late 90s that I think I've mentioned to you in passing, but is not a very well-known movie. And it's absolutely terrible. It's why it's not very well known. So it's kind of like a psychological thriller, or at least it's trying to be, / horror. It is called Wicked. It was released in 1998, and it stars Julia Stiles in one of her earlier roles.
Okay.
And it is a really messed up movie. First of all, it is really boring. Like, it's one of those films that was really boring. I first saw this when I was about 16 or 17, and I watched it with some friends. We were having a movie night, and it was really lame. So the basic premise is Julia Stiles plays this 15-year-old girl who does not get along with her mother and, okay, I can't believe I'm saying this, has a bit of a crush on her father. Yeah, I didn't write this. Yeah. And then one day she gets into a fight with her mother, and the fight escalates, and she ends up murdering her mother and hiding the body. And it looks like the mother's like run away. And then she decides to start trying to take the mother's place in everything. And let's just say this movie goes into some very uncomfortable territory. And then eventually the father does end up remarrying, and of course Julia Stiles' character, she hates the stepmother, and all the while she has this little sister who's only about like 10 or something, and the sister is trying to like figure out what's going on. And then there's this horrible part where they basically do confirm that the father and the daughter had sex at one point. You don't see it, but it's confirmed. And it's supposed to be presented like the daughter is the evil seductress, but it's like, dude, why are you sleeping with your 15-year-old daughter? That's illegal. Exactly. And then the end of the movie, it ends with the little sister killing the big sister, and then kind of the implication is that she's passed on the wicked gene to her little sister. So the whole movie is just a completely effed up premise. Julia Stiles is doing her damn best, bless her. This would have been right very early in her career, probably just before she did 10 Things, but she could not save this movie. And like I said, the incestuous overtones were, I don't know who greenlit this movie, but they were very, very badly handled and very badly portrayed. And it's just a really bad, I mean, even without that angle, it's a bad movie. You know, the kills are bad. Julia Stiles, similarly to Mila Kunis, she doesn't play a villain well. Like I said, she's trying her best, but it just doesn't come off. And yeah, all of the weird stuff that they put in with her and her dad, it's really creepy, and not in a good way. Like, not creepy in the way you want it to be creepy. It's creepy in that I am feeling very uncomfortable with the premise in this movie, even though it is a horror movie. So yeah, I would not recommend this movie to anyone. It's probably really hard to find, I would say, because it didn't do well. Aside from Julia Stiles, it doesn't really have any names in it that you'd recognize, and it just kind of flew under the radar, thankfully. Like I said, I only really watched it because I was having a movie night and one of my friends had just happened to pick it up. Otherwise, I don't think I ever would have come across it. So if you ever see it, don't watch it. My number 3, Wicked from 1998.
Yeah, I've not even heard of this one, so that's I do like that as a pick. Yeah, no, it's a different sort of film, and I was gonna ask, like, but I think you confirmed it. So it is actually the girl's father, not just a stepfather.
Yeah, no, it's her father.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's nasty.
Place that a movie, unless you're doing it in a serious way, like it's a serious drama. You can do it then, but otherwise it's just a place a movie just doesn't need to go to.
No,
you can do a shocking horror movie without, like, going to those sorts of depths.
Yes, absolutely.
So, my number 3, back to good old zombie again. My number 3, you knew this had to show up at some point. It's his Halloween remake.
Yeah.
Which, I know there's been some bad remakes over the years, but I'm quite comfortable saying this might be the worst remake in history. And it's funny because I went along at the time to see it at the cinema with some, with some hope. And I think that, and it's partly maybe because at that point I hadn't seen the original so much, and like, we talk about that movie so much and how, it just more and more over time it stands up as this masterpiece of horror. But I went along, and I think at the time, rather naively, I thought, at least it's being made by a fan, and that some hope. And I think it turns out that might be the worst thing possible, because sometimes you need a bit of detachment. And but yeah, I remember just storming out of the cinema at the end. I was so mad with this film, and how it could take things that were in the original so great and so cutting edge and so memorable, and just make them actually cheesy and like completely useless and throwaway, like the way they repeat the famous line, the boogeyman line at the end of the movie. And you remember that being so well delivered and captured in the first one, and it just comes off as very cheesy in this movie. It's just like a melodrama, like this kind of ugly gothic melodrama with the terrible zombie style to it, and it just completely misses the point of the original. It's not scary at all. I mean, I guess the cast are doing their best, but they're just given nothing. And once again, it's this zombie lens where everybody is a son of a bitch and everyone gross and untrustworthy, and just every character feels like the same, and we get this pointless backstory explaining stuff about his past, which you don't need, because as soon as you over explain Michael Myers, he is no longer as scary as if you don't.
He loses his mystique.
Loses his mystique. So a very bad film, a film which infuriated me back then, and then when we rewatched it for the channel, infuriated me all over again. And as I said, I'm pretty confident in saying it might be the worst remake of all time. So that's the way I'm going to sell it as being a really bad horror movie, is to say that. So that's Halloween 2007.
Yeah, absolutely cannot fault you for having that. I mean, we did our whole review on it, and we talked about how bad it was, and how I really do think one of the worst elements of it is that Zombie tried to both do his own thing and imitate Carpenter, and it just didn't work. It did not work at all. Not that I think if Zombie had just gone with his own thing, it would have been that much better, but at least it would have just been his. But yeah, I mean, our whole review, we talked about it. You know, I actually recently, just in the last few months, tried to rewatch it again. I remember thinking to myself, okay, maybe you're not remembering it as bad as it was. No, I got 10 minutes into it, and I was like, nope, it's as bad as I remember. We're definitely gone. And he adds so much unnecessary stuff. Like, the theatrical cut has a rape scene, which is just completely unnecessary, you know? Like, Zombie adds this element to his movies that is just not needed, and completely. The only thing I like about Zombie's films is I like the guy who plays Michael. He's one of Michael in the Zombie films I quite like. I find him quite intimidating, and I think that the guy who plays him, I think he's a WWE wrestler. I thought he is quite imposing, but everything else is just terrible. And yeah, absolutely agree with you having it on the list and having it this high. I just happen to think number 2 is just a bit worse because it just goes off the rails so completely. But I mean, those two films, you could really just put them together and just say these two are just two of the worst horror films ever. So it's really much of a muchness. Alrighty. So my number 2, you're definitely going to disagree with, and you're definitely going to disagree with me having it this high, but we had vastly different takeaways from this film. And let me just say that this film is a bastard!
Yeah.
Bastard!
Great
it is
film.
Pieces. No, it was not.
No, but you enjoy repeating the lines, so clearly you've got something out of the movie.
Oh, so bad. So very, very bad. Look, I can understand how some people may see this as a so bad it's good, but it didn't work that way for me. When I was watching it, it was just bad. From the horrible chainsaw dude, to the horrible acting, to the freaking Chinese dude who jumps out of nowhere and is like
that seems
doing
hilarious.
Like karate chopping and talking about how he overdosed on chop suey. Like, what the hell is that?
We've all been there.
I don't think that's a universal experience, but sure. But yeah, look, we did a whole review on it. I did talk about how I didn't like it. I think it's just not my type of movie. You know, it just didn't blend well with me, and I really did not enjoy it. I mean, the bastard bit does give me a laugh. That's at least something. And I don't mind the ending where the body comes up and like claws the dude's genitalia off, because I'm always up for dudes getting what they deserve. But the rest of the movie for me was just such a slog. It was such a slog. And I was rolling my eyes so much. And again, I think it's similar to that, like you having I Still Know What You Did Last Summer on here. Like, you can accept that it's bad, but for different people, so bad it's good plays differently. So I think for me, the pieces angle, it just didn't work for me. It just wasn't in that category. But I can understand why you might find it so bad it's good, but I couldn't, and I actually do think it is one of the worst horror films I've ever seen. So that's why it's number 2 on my list. I won't go too much more into it because we did do a whole review, guys, so you can go and watch it. And Keith is definitely disagreeing with me on this pick, as I knew he would, but that is my number 2. The bastard of a movie, Pieces.
I sensed it was coming, like, and earlier on when you had Christmas Evil, like, I anticipated it was I anticipated Pieces then, but like, I'm not surprised both have shown up on the list. But I've got to say, and this is an official quote from Alfred Hitchcock, this is the movie he wishes he made. Alfred Hitchcock actually said that.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
I'll leave it up to the audience to decide if I'm telling the truth or not. Okay. Great movie. Such a well-crafted, genius movie with a great twist. Pure genius. Cinema doesn't get much better.
Oh, dear.
So that's Pieces, which should be really high up on the best horror movies list, right? You've put it on the wrong list, Rachel. Hate to say.
Oh, you mean the same way you put Scream 3 on the wrong list? Okay, cool. We're in agreement there then. All right, cool.
I only regret not having that higher on this list. Okay, so my number 2 is, I think, the worst sequel in one of my favourite horror franchise. My number 2 is Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare.
Oh,
Part
dear. Poor
6.
Freddy.
Yeah, I think this is the one that was in 3D, and it is so obvious watching it.
Yeah.
There's even a contrivance in the plot where, for some reason, the main character uses 3D glasses to like go inside the dream world, and it's what the fuck, and it's just such an obvious thing. And I think one thing about the movie is I do have a fond memory of just renting the video, and at the time they gave you 3D glasses because that's what they did.
Yes, those little red and blue ones. Yes.
And just being so underwhelmed, you know, I expected to go into this whole 3D like world and just putting them on, and it was very like hardly any different from if I didn't have them on. It's like, really? And it's obviously now funny watching it and thinking about how far 3D has come and stuff. But yeah, very lame gimmick to sell the movie on. And it is one of those movies where they spend so much time hitting you over the head with the gimmick. But really, this is where the franchise totally lost its way, because I think up to a point, even though you can say number 4 isn't a great movie, I think 5 is when it really starts to get bad, and then 6 is easily the worst. But like, even number 4 I have enjoyment with, and there's some good scenes in 5 because so I think this is the one that really jumps the shark in the franchise, and just so many dumb things. And I have to remind you, this is the one where it's revealed that Freddy Krueger has a kid. So
yes.
It's like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Why is this a Friday? Sorry, not a Friday. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, what the hell? Really bad, rubbery, ropey CGI. Some of the worst practical effects I've seen it, certainly for this franchise, which is known for really great practical effects. The earlier films are standout in that. And many dumb scenes, many stupid set pieces, like the one with it's the one with where one of the characters, it's like his mother appears to him and is telling him to clean out his ears, and then of course it's Freddy, and that kill where he like stabs through with like the like the stuff you put in your ears to clean. This scene, so many scenes like that are so bad. You've got annoying characters, bad acting, and just so many dumb visuals. And obviously, as I said, the 3D gimmick is such a lame gimmick and so bad, and just hits you over the head with it. And we're at the point now in the franchise where Freddy literally feels like a stand-up comedian. It's gotten to that point where I think to a certain extent, up to about 4 and maybe even 5 a little, some of the stuff he's doing, although it is more campy than in at least some of it does fit with the sort of villain he is, but at this point it's just gone too far into the cheese, and he's just too campy and hammy to be scary anymore.
Yeah, he stops being scary.
So I get nothing from Freddy in the movie. I get nothing from the characters, like the human characters, and it just does so many silly things, really. And I've got it so high because it is one of my favorite franchises. And probably, I've not seen the remake. I know the remake is meant to be really bad, but putting that one aside, when it just comes to the sequels, I think this is quite easily the worst sequel, probably. The disappointing thing is, it's directed by the director of Tank Girl, who... I know that's not a perfect movie and people shit on it, but it's actually not. It's an interesting movie anyway. At least it's an interesting failure. So I think that movie shows she's not a bad director. I think maybe she was just saddled with a really bad script in this case, and early in her career maybe it wasn't quite what she wanted to do, but. So I feel bad for her a little bit. That's my number 2.
Nice.
Easily the weakest, I think.
I haven't seen all the Freddy films. I know that for a fact. But with the later ones, because they do tend to bleed into one another, I forget which ones I actually have. I think I've seen... This one's got Breckenmeyer in it, doesn't it? Playing his usual kind of stoner persona from the 90s. Let me have a look.
Maybe I'm not quite sure who
I think I have seen this one, but it's been so long that I can't. But I find with the Freddy films, after number 3, I tend to taper off until we get to New Nightmare, which I think is one of the best. So I don't blame you for having this on your list and having it this high, because I definitely get that. Now, before we get to number 1, I think you had some honorable mentions. I don't really have that many. I'll throw most of the Wrong Turn films in there, definitely for the mix, and I will put the Bye Bye Man on mine as well, because I definitely did not like that. But aside from that, I don't really have any. What have you got as honorable mentions before I reveal number 1?
Because I goofed up, I think originally Axem was going to be an honorable mention, but because I needed another movie, and that is a really bad movie. It just happens to be a movie I get a bit of chuckles out of, but anyway, so I forgot there was going to be another Wrong Turn movie, so it'll be an honourable mention now, which is Wrong Turn 6. That is the one at the hotel, and the one with the incest, the really gross, unnecessary incest, and some really rubbish acting, even for the standards of this franchise. So I think 6 is up there. It's so hard to pick because most of
They're
them
all so bad.
bad,
So
but
many are
I
so
think
bad.
if I had to pick, maybe 6 might be my least favorite of the franchise.
Yeah,
So
I hear
honorable
you.
mention. I forgot to put it on the list. It probably would have been on because I think it's even worse than 2, which I did have on the list. But
Yeah.
okay, yeah, that's funny, but that's a non. And the other 2 honorable mentions, I'll say, are Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends.
Well, I definitely
Now,
agree with ends, not with
I know
kills, though.
you. I know you do. Well, the only reason they're not on here is I've only seen them once each,
Fair
and
enough. Yeah.
probably to be fair, even though I do think it's a crap movie, yeah, maybe I can't quite justify Halloween Kills being on here. Like, I have seen much worse movies than that, and I think there's an argument that there's at least some goofy moments that make that quite entertaining at times. But Halloween Ends was close. It's only the fact that I've only seen it the once.
So my number 1 is a lesser known slasher film that came out in 2001, which I only saw for the first time this year, but it was so bad. So it is a little film. It is called Ripper. Like I said, it came out in 2001 and it stars AJ Cook, which was the main reason that I decided to buy it. I found it for like $2 at like a local secondhand DVD store. And I decided to buy it because the premise sounded interesting. So it's set at a college campus, and supposedly these murders start happening that echo Jack the Ripper, hence the name. And so it's just a slasher about that. Except that's not really what happens. That whole Jack the Ripper angle kind of never really comes up in the movie. So it starts, I'm going to give full spoilers because it's just such a crap movie, no one needs to watch it. So it starts with, it starts like a year before, we get a flashback a year before the events of the movie, and AJ Cook is staying at a cabin with some friends, and like all of her friends are slaughtered and the killer gets away. And so then it goes to a year later and she's studying criminology at school. And then all of her classmates start to be murdered. And I think they make some mild allusion to Jack the Ripper, but not really enough. But the problem with this movie is, I mean, pretty much everything, but it's really badly directed, like really badly directed. Like, think like film students in early 2000s badly directed. It's got like the weirdest angles and the narrative moves really weirdly. There's like, there's like no character development. So AJ Cook, she has this professor that she's fighting with back and forth, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the movie, with no build up and no explanation, she turns up to his house, they have sex, and then it's never mentioned for the rest of the movie. It's just like this completely random scene that goes nowhere. The kills make no sense and happen in really weird, convoluted order. Like, when I was watching this movie, it's not a long movie and it's not a smart movie, but I kept getting lost as to what the fuck was happening because it just keeps jumping from like scene to scene to scene to scene with no connection between any of these scenes. The kills are really lame. Some girl gets killed on the toilet. It's like Jurassic Park all over again, except without a T-Rex. And AJ Cook, bless her little heart, is trying her hardest, but even she can't carry this movie. And then there's this weird twist / reveal at the end, which not only makes no sense, it has no build up, where you discover that AJ Cook's character is the killer and that she goes into this Jack the Ripper persona when she becomes the killer. And then the end montage is like her living in her own head, where she's living in like this plush mansion and like going out to like kill people at night as like Jennifer the Ripper or something like that. And then it goes back to her, and you see that she's like in a mental asylum, but they don't really explain how she got to the mental asylum. So yeah, this movie is just all over the place. And like I said, I bought it because I like AJ Cook, and I will watch a lot of bad movies for actors I like. And the premise sounded kind of interesting. And I watched the trailer, and the trailer didn't look too bad, but the movie was just absolutely terrible. And I don't know that I can go much into more detail. I mean, watch it if you will, but just know it's kind of like the Bye Bye Man. Like it has that kind of feel where you get no answers and you just get all of these random kills and these random events that are just kind of stitched together, but don't really make a proper cohesive story. And it really is like the worst horror film I have seen in a long time because there's no scares, there's really no gore, there are no characters to grab onto, and there's not even really a proper storyline to kind of grab onto. So that is my number one ripper from 2001. Truly terrible slasher film.
Yeah, it sounds terrible. I don't think I've even heard of that one.
No.
No, because the only ripper I can think of is that TV show. Yeah, I can't.
Yeah.
No, okay. Well, okay, yeah, that does sound really terrible and miscast of AJ Cook, probably, especially when you see the twist. Like, up to that point, maybe fair enough, but when you see the twist,
it just doesn't work.
No. Okay. Well, if your number one is unpredictable, mine is anything but unpredictable. My number one is Halloween 2, as in the remake. Although it's not really a remake because it's quite different, but as in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2.
Nice.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's even worse than his first one. I think it found whole new ways to piss me off. I won't even say much about it because we've talked about Zombie a lot in this video, and we've reviewed this movie at great length. But yeah, just some of the stuff with like what they were going for with the religious imagery and the white horse. It's like, what the hell is this doing in a Halloween movie? It was so random, stupid. It looked stupid. It didn't work as part of the movie, and yeah, it wasn't scary at all. They did really insulting things with the characters, like Loomis. For some reason, they made him a sleazebag and someone who was like money hungry, fame hungry, and just a son of a bitch. Which, okay, Malcolm McDowell playing him, he can play that sort of character.
Yeah, but
no, it was wrong for Loomis, and it was just a lame part the way it was written, and yeah, just the fact that then we have to stomach the fact that by the end of the movie he apparently turns himself around, and we had to really believe that was like the way he was acting wasn't credible in the first place, but then they did another 360 with him where we had to stomach then, okay, by the end of the film he's apparently a good guy again. It's like, what the hell's going on with this movie? And once again, some really gross, terrible scenes, like the one involving Danielle Harris, who was like ill-served in the movie without doubt. And yeah, everything that was bad about the first one. But I think just because they did, I think the first one, at least it's partly a taste thing, and it's one of those where it's just a really bad remake, and that's what's bad about it. And as I said, it misses the whole point of the original and stuff. But I think this one is just worse because everything it tries to do, which is different, is just stuff that I don't like, and stuff which I don't think belongs in this sort of movie. And it's just a crap movie, full stop, regardless of whether it's a Halloween movie or not.
Yes, so definitely.
It found whole new ways to piss me off. And if there's a theme with this list and with your list, because obviously this appeared on your list as well, but it's just the fact that Zombie is on course to be one of the worst directors in history, and
I think
his brand of horror and filmmaking isn't for us. I'm not seeing his monsters yet, and that's probably
neither have I.
The nature of it, maybe, then we might escape his usual sort of antics so much, but we'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to see. Different lists, which I like, because it we're giving people lots of bad movies to watch, and it's fun if we have more diverse lists. And again, I think it comes down and what you can deal with in a horror film, and what you can find so bad it's good, and what you can find entertaining. But some of the ones that you had on your list I definitely agree with, and would have made it onto my list if I didn't have others that I dislike more. And I think there were a couple that I had that you'd probably feel the same way about.
Actually fun, like definitely more fun than watching the movies themselves.
Yes, definitely.
Like that, your list. highlights what a bad time for horror like the 2000s were.
Oh, yeah, they really were, weren't they?
It's so funny how suddenly it feels dated, even though it's not that long ago. But no, I agree with that. I think for horror, it is one of the barren periods. Let us know what you think in the comments, and also make suggestions for future lists, and give us your own picks as well, because that'll be fun to see. And just to get ahead of the game here, I will promote what our next big list is going to be like the next time we have an anniversary list. So we're switching to TV because we go back and forth when we do these anniversaries. So the next one will be our favourite TV characters of all time. That's our next big anniversary. We'll obviously do other lists before that, but that's our next big anniversary list, which will be about January. I haven't decided how many we'll do. We may even go up to a 50 on that one, because there's so many characters which we both obviously like from TV, but it'll be a big list anyway. So you can look forward to that coming sometime in the new year. So yeah, but if you have any other suggestions for lists, and like I said, comment on ours, give us your own. What do you consider the worst horror movies of all time? Yeah, but thanks for watching. Rachel, if you want to promote your channel.
Guys, you can follow me, Rachel McDonald, video essays on TV shows and movies. I do have quite a bit of horror content on my channel, and I am posting much more regularly these days. And I'm really close to 10,000 followers, so please come and follow me, because I'm going to do a big celebration when I reach that. Excellent. So Keith usually puts a link in the description, and my Tumblr and Twitter are also linked through my YouTube. So come follow me everywhere.
Okay, thanks. Keep watching scary movies, even bad ones.
Even bad ones.
Yeah, we'll see you again soon. Take care, guys.